The survival mind. Why fear still rules us. You walk into a room and something feels off. No sound, no threat, just a flicker in your gut. A tightening. A signal. Your conscious mind hasn't seen anything, but something older inside you has. This is the survival mind, the ancient part. The part that evolved long before language or law or logic. It doesn't care about happiness. It doesn't seek truth. It only wants one thing: don't die. You inherited it. We all did. A system of reflexes and instincts honed across millions of years. Before society, before civilization, before memory. It once kept you alive in jungles and deserts and frozen forests. And now it lives in your body, watching quietly, waiting for danger. But the world it was built for is gone. There are no predators in the supermarket, no rival tribes waiting in the next village. And yet, your heart still races when someone raises their voice. Your body tenses at criticism, your thoughts spiral after embarrassment, rejection, shame, as if your life were in danger, because to the survival mind, it is. It doesn't know the difference between emotional threat and physical threat. It responds to both the same way: tunnel vision, adrenaline, racing thoughts, frozen speech, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. You think you're overreacting, but your body isn't. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do, just in the wrong era. This mismatch is everywhere. Your fear of public speaking, your instinct to conform, your panic when you're alone too long, they all come from a time when exile meant death, when attention meant threat, when standing out made you vulnerable. You're not weak. You're not broken. You're ancient. And the survival mind doesn't care about your goals. It doesn't care about your dreams. It only asks, is it safe? And if the answer is no, even for reasons that seem small, it pulls the alarm. But here's the most haunting part. It will always pull the alarm a little too early, because it evolved to value false alarms over missed ones. Better to flinch at shadows than to miss the real monster. Better to panic and live than to be calm and die. So it protects you by scaring you. It loves you in the only way it knows how, by assuming everything wants to kill you. And it means well, but sometimes to grow you'll have to thank it and then do the thing anyway. Because survival was only the beginning. Once the body was safe, evolution asked something else of us. Something stranger, more reckless. Something that risked everything we had just to create something new. It's no longer about staying alive. It's about passing on the spark. The reproduction drive. Why we risk everything to be remembered. You fall in love. You crave someone. You flirt. You ache. You orbit another person like gravity itself has changed. And in those moments, it doesn't feel like biology. It feels like poetry, like fate, like something sacred. But underneath that ache is something ancient. The reproduction drive doesn't speak in words. It whispers in sensation. It paints beauty on faces and signals on hips and smiles and symmetry. It hijacks your attention and reroutes your logic. It doesn't care about compatibility. It doesn't care about peace. It only wants one thing: make more life. And not just any life, your genes, your patterns, your story passed forward into the next flickering generation. It's why people risk everything for romance, why kingdoms were built and burned over attraction, why we dress ourselves in status, humor, charisma. It's why rejection stings so deeply, not just emotionally but existentially, because on some level, to be unwanted feels like erasure. The reproduction drive is powerful because it disguises itself. It doesn't feel like a command. It feels like longing. We chase beauty, thinking it's personal taste, but our preferences are shaped by ancient signals, signs of health, fertility, strength, survival. And we tell ourselves we're choosing. But most of the time, we're responding. To cues we don't consciously understand. To instincts laid down before our ancestors could speak. But there's another layer. Because this drive isn't just about mating, it's about legacy. We want to be remembered, to leave a mark, to matter after we're gone. Some people do it through children, others through art, power, ideas, influence. We all want to echo beyond our body. And the reproduction drive uses that too. It promises immortality, not through gods, but through biology. Through the gaze of a child with your eyes, through the survival of something that once lived inside you. But it also tricks us. It makes us believe that love is eternal, that chemistry is connection, that obsession is meaning. It pulls us into relationships that burn fast and bright and leave scars. It convinces us that desire equals destiny. It doesn't, not always. Because this part of the brain doesn't care if we're happy. It only cares that we reproduce. And yet, even knowing that, we keep falling. We keep chasing. Because the reproduction drive is not just in our body, it's in our myth, our music, our madness, our poetry. It is the reason we risk heartbreak again and again. And underneath all of that is something even more addictive. Not the person, not the act, but the chemical that makes us crave it all. Dopamine, the engine of desire. Why we chase, not hold. You get a new message, a like, a notification, a flirtation. Your heart jumps just a little, a flicker of excitement, a hit of energy, a reason to care again. You're not even sure why it matters, but it does. That's dopamine. Not the chemical of pleasure, the chemical of pursuit. It doesn't reward you for having. It rewards you for wanting, for chasing, striving, reaching, for the thrill of almost. Dopamine is the engine under every obsession, every scroll, every game, every new crush, big idea, looming goal. It's not about satisfaction. It's about anticipation. The high before the prize. The promise that something amazing is just one more step away. And once you understand that, everything changes. Because dopamine doesn't care what you're chasing. It lights up whether it's love or power, validation or revenge, sugar or success. It just says, go, and we do. We chase things we don't need. Want things we don't understand. Stay locked in patterns of pursuit, even when the prize is hollow. Because the drive itself feels like purpose. The brain learns fast, and once it finds a loop that rewards pursuit, it loops again. Social media, shopping, gambling, workaholism, romance. The illusion that one more scroll, one more click, one more try will finally complete the circuit. But completion isn't the point, because the moment you get the thing, dopamine drops. Satisfaction is fleeting. Achievement fades. What mattered so much yesterday starts to feel small, and you start looking again. Not because you're greedy, not because you're broken, but because you're built this way, and it served us once. When food was rare, danger constant, goals immediate, we had to keep moving, keep solving, keep wanting. The ones who lingered died. The ones who hungered survived. Now, we live in a world of abundance, and the hunger remains. So we chase more followers, more money, more beauty, more novelty, more stimulation, more. But here's the truth. Dopamine doesn't tell you. It never ends. It never arrives. It only moves forward, one desire into the next, one fantasy collapsing into reality, only to birth a new one. And the cost, we forget how to be with what we have. Because there's something terrifying about standing still, about resting in contentment, about not needing to chase. But we'll get to that. First, let's look at what happens when the chase fails, when you don't get what you want, and something inside you breaks. The pain of loss versus the joy of gain, why fear wins. You find $20 on the ground. Unexpected, easy, yours. You smile. You feel lucky. For a moment, the day is brighter. Now imagine losing $20, the same amount, gone from your pocket, without warning. The frustration, the anger, the sting of carelessness or bad luck. Which moment feels stronger? For almost everyone, it's the loss. This is the mind's asymmetry, its quiet, irrational tilt toward fear. We are wired to feel loss more sharply than gain, to remember pain longer than joy, to react more strongly to threat than to opportunity. And it makes sense. Because evolution didn't care if you were happy. It cared if you were alive. Missing a gain meant disappointment. Missing a threat meant death. So our brains evolved a system of alerts that rings louder for danger than for delight. We overreact to losses. We hold grudges longer than we cherish compliments. We panic at setbacks and downplay progress. We worry more about what we might lose than what we could build. And it governs so much of what we do. Why we hesitate, why we settle, why we cling, why we don't start the project, confess the truth, make the leap, because the fear of loss looms larger than the promise of gain. This fear is ancient, and it's not just emotional, it's mathematical. In studies, people consistently require more than twice the reward to take the same risk they'd avoid for fear of loss. So we bargain with safety. We seek guarantees. We stay small. Because pain has sharper teeth than joy has wings. But the cost of that tilt is invisible. The dreams untried. The connections unspoken. The versions of ourselves that could have emerged if we weren't so afraid of the fall. Loss hurts more than gain heals. And our lives are shaped by that imbalance. We create entire belief systems to soften the blow. We tell ourselves we never really wanted what we lost. We rewrite our memories to defend against regret. We bury longing under rationalizations, because the alternative to face what could have been is too raw. So fear becomes wisdom, caution becomes identity, and the joy of gain becomes something we admire from a distance while flinching from the cost. But the survival mind isn't the only part of us that evolved, because deep in the body there are other instincts more primal, more visceral, designed not just to protect us from death, but from corruption itself. The reflex of disgust, why some things must be rejected instantly. You see something rotten. A smell hits you before thought arrives. Your face twists, your stomach recoils. Something in your body decides no before your mind even has the words. That's disgust. Not just a reaction, a boundary. A line drawn instantly between what belongs and what must be expelled. The reflex of disgust evolved to protect us from spoiled food, from disease, from contamination we couldn't yet understand. Before we had science, we had nausea. Before we had hygiene, we had revulsion. But disgust didn't stay in the kitchen or the forest. It moved inward. It moralized. It attached itself to behavior, to people, to identities. We didn't just say that's unclean. We said, you are. And suddenly, the same reflex that helped us avoid illness became a weapon, a justification, a way to dehumanize, to exclude, to exile. Because once something is labeled disgusting, logic doesn't matter. Empathy shuts down. The conversation is over. That's the power of disgust. It bypasses reason. It overrides nuance. It feels righteous, immediate, pure. It tells us we're protecting something. Our bodies, our families, our culture, our soul. But often it protects us from change. Because disgust doesn't question itself. It doesn't evolve on its own. And the things we find disgusting are rarely universal. They're taught, inherited, conditioned. What repulses one culture might be sacred in another. What horrifies you now might have once felt natural. And that's what makes this reflex so dangerous, because disgust feels like truth. But it's often just fear dressed in urgency. We recoil from difference, from aging, from disability, from poverty, from the things that remind us of what we fear becoming. We say unclean when we mean uncomfortable. We say wrong when we mean strange. And sometimes we even turn it inward. We look at our own bodies, our own thoughts, our past, our mistakes, and we feel disgust not at the world, but at ourselves. As if being flawed means being filthy. As if imperfection deserves exile. But you are not a contaminant. You are not a stain. You're human. And to survive, evolution gave us more than just revulsion. It gave us the need to connect, to belong, to be seen as worthy. Because the most dangerous thing in a tribe wasn't being sick, it was being cast out. Status as survival. Why we can't stop comparing. You walk into a room and instantly, without meaning to, you scan the hierarchy. Who's confident? Who's admired? Who's ignored? You notice clothes, posture, tone of voice. Not to judge, but to place yourself, higher or lower, better or worse. You do it even when you don't want to. Because long before social media and high school and office politics, status meant survival. In early human groups, status determined everything. Who got food, who got protection, who got to speak, who got to stay. To be low status wasn't just embarrassing, it was dangerous. The outcast ate last. The outcast stood alone when predators came, and so we evolved to care, deeply, desperately. It's why shame burns so hot. Why humiliation lingers. Why approval feels like oxygen. Because your brain still believes status is safety. That to rise is to live longer. That to fall is to risk death. But in the modern world, the game never ends, and the rules keep changing. Now status isn't about hunting or shelter, it's about aesthetics, follower counts, job titles, cleverness, morality, victimhood. Even humility becomes currency. It's not enough to be. You must be seen being, and preferably seen winning. And that craving for visibility, recognition, admiration, relevance, drives more than we admit. It shapes careers, relationships, beliefs. We choose sides not just for truth, but for belonging. We signal values not just to live them, but to rank higher than those who don't. And when someone threatens our status, disagrees, outshines, dismisses us, it feels like an attack. Not on ego, but on identity, on survival itself. That's why rejection cuts so deep. Why envy poisons quietly. Why even small slights echo louder than praise. The survival mind doesn't know the difference between a peer group and a predator pack. It just feels the shift and panics. And so we compare, constantly. Not because we're vain, but because we're wired to measure where we stand. Because somewhere inside us is a voice whispering, don't fall too far behind. Don't let them forget you. Don't let them leave you out. But the truth is, the game can't be won. Because status is a moving target, a shifting shadow, a ladder that extends forever upward. You climb one rung, only to see 3 more above. And still, you climb. But not all hunger is for approval. Some cravings go deeper, past the social, past the surface, into the quiet spaces where something inside you reaches for more than anyone can give. Hunger beyond the body, why we crave what we can't touch. You eat, you rest, you survive another day. The body is calm, the needs are met, and still, you feel something pulling at you. A kind of hunger that has nothing to do with food, a reaching, a restlessness. Something is missing and you can't name it. This is hunger beyond the body. Not physical, but existential. a longing that doesn't fade after breakfast or sleep, a space inside that doesn't respond to comfort, because it's not about survival, it's about meaning. We are creatures of appetite, but not just for calories or safety. We crave attention, beauty, novelty, love, status, impact, transcendence, and even when we get those things, the hunger remains. Because the thing we're reaching for isn't outside us, it's a feeling, a moment of being whole, of being seen, of being significant in a way we can't quite define, and so we chase it in symbols, in trophies, in achievements, in the eyes of others, in stories we tell ourselves about why we matter. This is the hunger that builds civilizations and burns people out. It's the fuel of ambition and addiction. The reason we scroll, strive, stretch ourselves thin. We want more than enough. We want something else, something that tells us we are not just alive, but important. And we live in a world that knows how to feed that hunger, briefly. Algorithms, products, promises, experiences, all shaped to trigger longing, all designed to tell us that wholeness is just one step away, one click, one goal, one transformation. But it never lasts. Because hunger beyond the body isn't meant to be fed, it's meant to move us. It's the part of us that refuses to be satisfied, that pushes beyond comfort, that dreams, explores, creates. It's what drives art and wonder and rebellion, the ache that says, there's more to this than breathing. But that ache can turn on us. Because if we believe it must be satisfied, if we mistake the hunger for a problem to fix, we live in a loop of grasping, of endless dissatisfaction, of measuring our lives by what we still lack. And we forget something crucial. This hunger didn't evolve by accident. It was placed there, not to keep us content, but to keep us moving, searching, spreading, building, not just bodies, but copies, echoes, replicas, because under all our longing, there's a deeper engine still. And it doesn't care if we're happy, it only cares that something of us survives. Are we just vehicles for genes when purpose isn't yours? You wake up, you plan your day, you make choices, big and small. You believe they're yours, guided by thought, shaped by values. You tell yourself you're living your life. But what if you're not the driver? What if you're the vehicle and something older is at the wheel? Evolutionary biology doesn't see you as the center. It sees your genes. And from that lens, everything you are, your strength, your charm, your fear, your desire, is just a strategy for replication. Your body is a carrier, your mind a tool, your choices a means to an end that isn't conscious but is absolute. Richard Dawkins called it the selfish gene. Not because genes feel greed, but because they act as if they do. They replicate, they mutate, they outcompete, and they use organisms, plants, animals, humans, as temporary vessels to get that job done. So you fall in love, protect your family, seek admiration, avoid death, not because you're free, but because those behaviors kept past genes alive. You are the descendant of survivors, of replicators, of winners in a race no one remembers running. And your sense of self? That might just be the interface. A user-friendly illusion created by biology to keep the machine moving forward. It's efficient. It works. It gives you meaning, joy, suffering, purpose. It gives you enough narrative to keep going. But underneath that narrative is code. And code doesn't care if you feel fulfilled. It cares if you reproduce. It cares if your copies thrive. Your creativity, your depression, your empathy, your rage. They might all be side effects of a deeper algorithm. But here's the strange part. Even if that's true, even if we are just genetic strategies wrapped in self-awareness, there's something in us that knows, that resists, that asks questions genes don't need us to ask. What if I don't want children? What if I reject tradition? What if I devote my life to art, or stillness, or revolution? What if I say no to replication and yes to something else? And that tension, the rebellion of consciousness against code, might be the most human thing about us. Because whether or not you're a vehicle, there's still a voice behind the wheel that insists on steering, even if the road was already built for you. The illusion of control, why we pretend the reins are ours. You double-check the lock. You refresh the email. You make a list, then another. You plan your steps, your week, your future. And underneath it all is a quiet belief that if you do everything right, things will go your way. But control is a story we tell ourselves to feel safe. It's the illusion that effort guarantees outcome. That preparation prevents chaos. That life is a machine, and we're holding the levers. But life isn't a machine. It's weather. It's waves. It's something you can sail in, but never command. Still, we reach for control. Because uncertainty is unbearable. Not knowing feels like weakness. We'd rather hold the illusion than admit how much isn't up to us. And that illusion gets reinforced. When our actions work, when planning brings success, we believe it's proof that we're in charge, that the system makes sense. But we forget the luck, the timing, the invisible factors we never saw. Control comforts, but it also traps. Because when things go wrong, we blame ourselves. We search for the error. We ruminate, believing we missed a step or failed a rule. The illusion turns on us. What once felt like power now feels like guilt. And worse, we try to control others, their choices, their emotions, their opinions of us. As if the right words, the right performance, the right mask will make people behave the way we need them to. But people are weather too, and trying to hold them still is like trying to still the wind. We micromanage, we obsess, we say yes when we want to scream. We play roles we hate just to maintain the appearance that everything is fine, and it works until it doesn't. Because life shatters illusion, always. A diagnosis, a betrayal, a loss you couldn't prevent. And suddenly the scaffolding falls and you're left with the truth. You were never holding the reins. You were never steering the storm. But maybe that's not weakness. Maybe it's freedom. Because when you stop trying to control everything, you start participating. You meet life where it is, not where you wish it was. You respond rather than command. You breathe rather than brace. But that only works if you can recognize the fear underneath. Because control was never about power. It was about protection. And in a world this uncertain, the deepest part of us is still scanning. Still flinching, still bracing for the thing that might go wrong. Hardwired for danger, why safety never feels like enough. You check the locks again. You replay the conversation. You imagine what could go wrong on the drive, the trip, the future you haven't lived yet. Even when things are calm, there's a whisper in the back of your mind. What if? This is not paranoia. It's programming. Your brain evolved in a world where danger was everywhere. Predators, famine, injury, the unknown. The ones who ignored risk didn't survive. The ones who anticipated fear, who jumped at shadows, passed their genes forward. You are the descendant of the anxious. So your nervous system learned to scan, to predict, to brace. It learned that safety isn't a state, it's a process. A vigilance, a never-ending awareness that something could go wrong even if everything seems right. This is why peace feels temporary, why rest feels earned but never permanent, why you keep waiting for the other shoe to drop even when there's no sound. Because your body still lives in the wild. It doesn't care that there's no tiger in the bushes. It reacts to debt, to texts, to silence, to ambiguity, the same way it once reacted to a snapping twig in the dark. And the more unknowns we face, the louder that system gets. It's not just the big threats. It's the small ones, the social cues, the tone of voice, the unread message, microsignals that feel like danger, rejection, shame, exile. Your mind may know you're safe. Your body often doesn't. That's why fear lives in the stomach, in the throat, in the chest. It's not imagined. It's biological. A system designed to react before you can even name what's wrong. And in a world flooded with information, the system short-circuits. Every headline is a threat. Every possibility becomes a source of anxiety. We try to prepare for everything, thinking preparedness is peace. But peace doesn't come from knowing the future. It comes from accepting that you can't. And still, the scan continues. Because some part of you believes that if you think hard enough, fear hard enough, control hard enough, you can prevent the pain before it happens. You can't. But that doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. And even if we're hardwired for danger, we also evolved something else. Something strange. Something no predator ever needed. We evolved the ability to reason, and with it came a new illusion, one that flatters us, but hides just how wild we still are. The myth of rationality, why logic is rarely in charge. You weigh the pros and cons. You gather evidence. You tell yourself you're being logical, making the best possible choice. But if you look closer, you might see it, the hunch, the emotion, the invisible tilt that came before the reasoning. Because rationality doesn't lead the way. It cleans up after the decision's already been made. This is the myth of rationality. The comforting idea that we are mostly reasonable creatures who use logic to guide our lives, that our judgments are based on facts, our beliefs rooted in reason. But the truth is messier. Most decisions begin in the body, in feeling, in intuition. We want something, fear something, sense something, and then we build a story that makes that feeling seem smart. We use logic like a lawyer, not a judge, not to discover truth, but to defend what we already feel, and it happens faster than we realize. Studies show that we often make moral judgments in milliseconds and only afterward build the reasoning to support them. We think we're evaluating when really we're justifying. We cherry-pick facts, we ignore contradictions, we believe what feels right and call it reason. And the smarter we are, the better we are at this illusion. Because intelligence doesn't protect us from bias, it can make bias harder to see. We become skilled at rationalizing, at debating, at weaponizing logic to reinforce emotion. And this matters because we build systems on the assumption of reason. Politics, justice, economics. We pretend humans are rational actors making informed choices. But underneath that, we're still tribal, emotional, afraid. We vote with our identity. We consume with our cravings. We argue with our wounds. And we think we're right. Because the rational mind doesn't just deceive others, it deceives us. It gives us the illusion of control, of clarity, of moral superiority. It flatters us into thinking we're less biased than everyone else. But knowing this isn't defeat. It's humility, because real wisdom starts when we admit that logic is not a light we always carry, but one we must keep reaching for. And to reach it, we have to confront how we actually think. Not in pure logic, but in shortcuts, in instincts, in mental patterns that helped us survive, even if they often get things wrong. Heuristics. Fast and flawed thinking. Why we get it wrong so quickly. You make hundreds of decisions every day. What to eat, what to say, where to go, who to trust. And most of the time you don't even notice the thinking. That's not laziness. That's heuristics. Mental shortcuts. Patterns. Rules of thumb that help you move fast. Because thinking is expensive. It takes time, energy, effort, and in a dangerous world, speed was survival. You couldn't afford to deliberate while something was charging at you. So the brain evolved a system that favors efficiency over accuracy. It fills in gaps. It jumps to conclusions. It makes snap judgments based on limited cues. And, for the most part, it works well enough. You avoid danger. You make decisions. You navigate life without constantly freezing in doubt. But the price of speed is distortion. You assume what's familiar is true. What's recent is important. What's loud is relevant. You judge people by first impressions. You mistake confidence for competence. You see patterns where none exist. Because heuristics don't aim for truth, they aim for good enough. And good enough got our ancestors through the day. But in a complex world, the same shortcuts backfire. We stereotype, we misread risk, we trust the wrong voices, we vote, spend, argue, and believe based not on logic, but on patterns we feel more than understand. You cross the street without thinking. You assume someone's mood from a glance. You take one bad experience and expect it to repeat forever. The brain doesn't pause to double-check. It moves forward as if its first guess is the only guess it needs, and worse, we're unaware of it. The shortcut feels like clarity. The mistake feels like certainty. We don't feel the gaps in our reasoning. We just feel sure, and that false confidence is harder to challenge than any lie, because to question it is to question the self. And we don't like to feel unsure. We don't like ambiguity. So we protect the shortcut, defend the error, and bury the doubt. But every now and then, something breaks the pattern. A contradiction, a failure, a truth we didn't expect. And in that moment, the shortcut stutters, the illusion cracks, and something uncomfortable begins to rise. Not confusion, not fear, but conflict. A tension between what we thought was true and what we can no longer deny. Cognitive dissonance, when your mind refuses to agree with itself. You believe you're honest, and then you lie. You think you're open-minded, and then you shut down. You love someone, and yet you hurt them. Two things, both true, that don't fit together, and something inside you starts to twist. That twist is cognitive dissonance, the mental tension that sparks when your actions and beliefs collide. It's the ache of contradiction, the inner friction of living out of alignment with the story you tell yourself about who you are, and your brain hates it. Because the brain wants consistency, coherence, harmony, a stable self-image that says, I know who I am. When that image cracks, the discomfort isn't just psychological, it's physiological. Anxiety, restlessness, that itchy need to resolve the tension now. So we do whatever we can to ease the dissonance. We justify, I had no choice. We minimize, it wasn't that bad. We reframe, that's not really what happened. We bend the truth, not always to deceive others, but to protect ourselves. Because the alternative to admit we were wrong, flawed, hypocritical threatens the foundation of identity. And the stronger the belief, the deeper the dissonance. If you've built your identity around kindness, then one act of cruelty can send you spiraling. If you see yourself as rational, then realizing you've acted out of bias or emotion creates a fracture too sharp to ignore. So we patch it. We rewrite memory. We blame others. We double down. And sometimes we change the belief entirely. It's not just personal. Societies do it. Groups, institutions. When the truth threatens the collective self-image, it gets buried, denied, or distorted until the narrative feels smooth again. But dissonance isn't failure. It's feedback. It means your values are still alive. That the gap between who you are and who you want to be still matters. And if you can sit with the discomfort, if you can hold the contradiction long enough to examine it, something else emerges. Not shame, but growth. Because sometimes the mind doesn't twist to avoid the truth. Sometimes it twists to point toward it. And when that happens, we don't just protect our beliefs, we begin to question where they came from and why they always feel so right, even when they're wrong. Confirmation bias. Why you only hear what you already believe. You read an article, watch a video, hear a story, and something inside you nods. Exactly, you think. That's what I've been saying all along. But is it true? Or is it just familiar? This is confirmation bias. The mind's quiet tendency to seek out, favor, and remember information that agrees with what we already believe. It feels like learning. It feels like discovery. But more often it's a mirror, a reflection of the self we've already chosen to protect. And it doesn't just happen in politics or philosophy. It happens in relationships, in health, in memory. We notice what confirms. We overlook what contradicts. We interpret facts through filters we don't know we're wearing because disagreement feels like danger. When someone challenges your belief, it's not just intellectual. It feels like an attack on your judgment, your identity, your tribe. And the brain, still wired for survival, defends. So we click the stories that validate, follow the voices that agree. Surround ourselves with people who reinforce what we already think, not because we're arrogant, but because we want to feel safe. Certainty calms us, doubt agitates, and slowly the bubble grows. A world shaped by selective exposure, where everything you see proves you're right and everything that doesn't gets ignored, mocked, or dismissed. Even facts can't break through. You believe a friend betrayed you, so you focus on their late replies, their tone, their forgotten promises. You ignore their kindness, their explanations, because the betrayal fits the story your mind has already decided is true. Or you think a political group is evil, and every action they take, no matter how neutral, is interpreted through that lens. You don't question the headline. You don't seek context, because your belief is already wearing armor. This bias even shows up in science. Researchers have found that people interpret the same evidence differently depending on their beliefs. Two people can read the same data and walk away feeling more confident in opposite conclusions. That's not analysis. That's identity protecting itself. In fact, the stronger the evidence against a belief, the harder we dig in. The brain doesn't seek truth, it seeks coherence. And confirmation bias helps us maintain it, even if it means warping reality. But this isn't just about information. It's about attention, because what we notice, we remember. And what we remember becomes our truth. And once a belief is formed, it becomes the reference point, the anchor, the thing every new piece of data must now orbit around, even if that anchor is completely wrong. The anchoring effect, when the first number controls the game. You walk into a store and see a jacket labeled $500, marked down to $200. It feels like a deal, like you're saving money. But are you really? Or are you just anchored? The anchoring effect is one of the brain's simplest and most stubborn biases. It happens when an initial piece of information, often arbitrary, shapes all judgments that follow. Even when we know it shouldn't matter, it does. You hear a salary expectation, a price, a number, a claim, and instantly your mind latches onto it. The anchor becomes your reference point, even if it's meaningless. You negotiate from it, compare against it, evaluate new information through it. You don't realize it, but your perception has shifted, quietly, subtly, powerfully. It shows up everywhere. A menu lists a $200 wine bottle next to a $60 one, and suddenly $60 feels reasonable. A lawyer asks for an absurdly high settlement, knowing it'll make a smaller one seem fair. A real estate agent shows you an overpriced house first, so the next one feels like a bargain. And it's not just numbers, it's ideas, labels, first impressions. If someone tells you a person is difficult, you'll start noticing their flaws. If you hear a rumor before meeting someone, it sticks. Anchors aren't just prices, they're frames for perception. And they don't need to be true, they just need to show up first. Because once the anchor is in place, everything else is pulled toward it. And the scariest part? You almost never notice it happening. Even experts fall for it. Judges influenced by sentencing suggestions. Doctors influenced by the number a patient casually mentions. Anchoring isn't stupidity, it's how the brain conserves effort. It grabs the first number and builds from there. But that first number might be a trap. A way to control you without force. To bend your expectations before you've had a chance to form your own. And this matters because expectations shape experience. If you believe something is expensive, it tastes better. If you believe someone is impressive, you overlook their flaws. The anchor colors everything. So be careful where you let your mind begin. Because sometimes the first thought isn't just a guess, it's a leash. And sometimes that leash tugs us into optimism, into the belief that things will work out, that we'll beat the odds, that no matter what the data says, we'll be the exception. The optimism bias. Why we think we'll be the exception. You know the risks, you've read the statistics, you understand that things could go wrong, and yet you believe they won't. Not to you. That's the optimism bias. The quiet, persistent belief that your future will turn out better than average, that you'll live longer, love better, succeed more, that somehow the odds don't apply. It's not arrogance, it's wiring. This bias isn't a flaw in the system, it is the system. Humans evolved to be slightly delusional, to assume the best, even when logic says otherwise. Because hope, no matter how irrational, kept us moving. If we truly processed every risk, every failure rate, every danger, we might never act at all. The optimism bias gives us courage. It lets us try again after heartbreak, start new ventures after old ones collapse, imagine a better future in the face of brutal reality. Without it, we might survive, but we wouldn't strive. But optimism isn't neutral. It distorts. We underestimate how long things will take, how much they'll cost, how hard they'll be. We expect others to change. We ignore red flags. We stay in jobs, relationships, or habits far longer than we should because we believe quietly, this time it'll be different. It shows up in finance, in health, in love. We overestimate success and downplay failure. We assume we'll beat the average even when we are, by definition, the average. And when things go wrong, we're surprised, hurt, confused. Because our internal prediction model was never realistic, it was protective. Optimism shields us from paralysis, but it also leaves us vulnerable to disappointment. And even knowing this, we keep hoping. Because hope is addictive. It tastes like possibility. It whispers that you're special, that the story will bend in your favor, that the setbacks are temporary, and the next chapter will redeem the pain. Sometimes it's true, but sometimes the bias isn't about facts or future. It's about narrative. We believe we'll win not because it's likely, but because it's necessary, because the alternative feels unbearable. And so we keep looking forward, building futures in our heads, rehearsing victories before they exist, living not in the moment, but in the imagined. And that habit doesn't come from fantasy. It comes from something deep in the brain, a trick we all use, one that lets us travel through time without ever leaving our seat. Mental time travel. Why we can't stay in the present. You're here, but not really. Some part of your mind is drifting, back to a moment that haunts you, forward to a possibility that excites or terrifies you, a conversation you wish had gone differently, a future you're trying to predict. This is mental time travel, the brain's ability to leave the present and simulate what was or what could be. It's not a flaw, it's one of our greatest abilities. We can relive, rehearse, regret, plan, reimagine. It's how we learn from the past and prepare for what's coming. No other species does it quite like we do. It's part of what makes us human, But this gift has a cost. Because the past doesn't change, and the future doesn't arrive the way we expect, yet we spend hours, days, revisiting what can't be fixed and rehearsing what may never come. We edit memories to soften pain or justify actions. We fast forward into catastrophe, bracing for events that might never happen. We escape into fantasies. We punish ourselves with nostalgia. And all the while, the present slips by unnoticed. Why do we do it? Because the present is fragile. It's full of uncertainty, vulnerability, things we can't control. The past has clarity, even when it hurts. The future has promise, even when it scares us. So we wander, and the brain rewards us for it. Imagination lights up reward centers. Planning makes us feel prepared. Revisiting pain gives us the illusion of control, as if rethinking the same mistake will prevent the next one, as if perfecting the future in our heads will somehow protect us. But it doesn't, because no amount of rehearsal can make the future safe. No amount of rumination can rewrite what's been lived. And still, we do it. Not because we're lost, but because we're trying to make sense of the story. To understand how we became who we are. To predict who we might become. Mental time travel isn't weakness, it's meaning-making. But it can also trap us. Because sometimes the journey backward isn't about clarity, it's about shame. And sometimes the leap forward isn't about hope, it's about escape. And in both cases we bend our thoughts not toward truth, but toward comfort, because often the past we remember and the future we imagine aren't reflections, they're justifications. Motivated reasoning, when truth bends to desire. You hear something that contradicts your beliefs, and instantly your mind begins to work, not to understand, but to defend, to explain it away, to find holes in the argument, to dismiss the source, to protect what you already think. That's not logic. That's motivated reasoning. It's the mental process where our conclusions come first and our justifications follow. We don't reason to find the truth. We reason to preserve a version of truth that serves us. Because truth, real truth, is inconvenient. It disrupts identity. It threatens belonging. It can leave us exposed, ashamed, or uncertain. So the mind reaches not for accuracy, but for comfort. And it's faster than we think. We form beliefs intuitively, emotionally, and then our intellect builds walls around them. We look for evidence that confirms. We ignore what doesn't. We construct elaborate arguments that feel objective when really they're scaffolding for something we already need to be true. It shows up everywhere. In politics, in religion, in personal relationships. You believe your partner loves you, so you explain away the distance. You believe your enemy is cruel, so you twist their kindness into manipulation. You believe a theory, so you dismiss every contradiction as bias. You believe your pain is someone else's fault, so you reinterpret every neutral action as an attack. You believe you're a good person, so you erase memories that don't support the narrative. You believe someone is beyond redemption, so you deny the evidence of their growth. The smarter we are, the better we are at it. Intelligence becomes a tool for rationalization. We don't become less biased. We become better at hiding it from ourselves, and the more personal the topic, the stronger the effect. Because this kind of reasoning is protective. It shields us from emotional harm. It lets us hold on to self-worth, to community, to moral high ground, and to lose any of those, to admit we might be wrong, is not just humbling. It can feel like dying. We tie our beliefs to our identity, our opinions to our belonging, our certainty to our safety. And when those beliefs get challenged, the mind doesn't just debate, it defends the fortress of who we think we are. So the brain rewrites the story, not out of malice, out of survival. But there's a cost. Because the more we bend reality to fit our desires, the harder it becomes to see things clearly. We lose touch with nuance, with complexity, with the ability to truly change. And even when the facts are right in front of us, we reinterpret them, twist them, reframe them, until the message feels familiar enough to believe. The invisible influence of framing, how the same truth can feel like a lie. You're told there's a 90% chance of success. You relax. It sounds promising. But then you hear the same thing framed a different way. A 10% chance of failure. And suddenly, it feels riskier. Nothing changed, except the frame. Framing is the hidden force that shapes how we interpret reality. It's not the facts that change our minds, it's how the facts are presented. The words, the tone, the context. Two people can say the same thing in different ways, and only one will feel true. We think we respond to truth, but we respond to stories. Say a treatment saves 90 out of 100 lives, it feels hopeful. Say it fails for 10 people, it feels terrifying. Say a candidate supports freedom, and you lean in. Say they support removing regulations, and you pull away. The details haven't changed, but the feeling has. Because we don't think in data, we think in emotion. Framing taps into that. It activates bias. It makes small differences feel enormous. It can make risks feel safe, and safety feel dangerous. It can turn a victim into a suspect, a failure into a lesson, a statistic into a story that justifies anything. And it's subtle. The news headline, the order of choices on a survey, the way someone introduces a topic, the first few words shape the next 1,000. Because once a frame is in place, the mind resists anything that breaks it. It doesn't matter how intelligent you are. If you hear something framed with confidence, clarity, and emotion, you're more likely to believe it even if it's false. And once you believe it, everything you see reinforces it. You stop noticing the frame altogether. It just feels like reality. And that's where it becomes dangerous. Because framing doesn't just influence opinion, it shapes identity. It tells us who we are, who the enemy is, what we should fear, what we should want. It builds the lens through which we view the world. But here's the twist. We don't just receive frames, we carry them. And sometimes what we see in others has more to do with our own reflection than with the truth in front of us. The mind's warped mirror, projection. When you see yourself in everyone else, you're angry at someone. You don't trust them. You feel judged, dismissed, disrespected. But deep down, the question creeps in. Are they actually doing that? Or are you? Projection is when the mind mistakes its own shadow for someone else's shape. It's not lying, it's blindness. We see parts of ourselves we don't want to face, so we place them out there, on other people, on strangers, on those closest to us. It begins as a defense, because it's painful to admit what lives inside us, the jealousy, the insecurity, the selfishness. So instead of owning it, we accuse, we critique, we react, not to what's real, but to what we can't bear to recognize in the mirror. Projection distorts relationships. You assume someone hates you because you fear being disliked. You think they're manipulating you because you know how to manipulate. You accuse them of not listening, while refusing to hear what they're actually saying. It feels like perception, but it's reaction. And the closer someone is to your hidden wound, the stronger the distortion becomes. They say something small, and it lands like an insult. They take space, and you feel abandoned. They disagree, and you feel attacked. Because what you're really reacting to isn't them, it's you. But projection isn't just about blame. It's also about admiration. We idealize people who reflect parts of ourselves we've buried. We fall in love with potential we haven't dared to live. We envy traits we secretly crave. The mind doesn't just hide what it fears. It also hides what it longs for. And so we assign meaning to faces. We build entire stories around behaviors we barely understand. We make others the container for emotions we haven't processed. It's how we survive when self-awareness is too sharp to hold. But projection keeps us trapped. It limits connection. It blinds us to the truth of others and the truth of ourselves. Because as long as we're seeing ghosts, we can't see the person in front of us. And until we reclaim those scattered pieces of ourselves, we keep mistaking echoes for voices and shadows for intentions. But there is a voice we trust, one that narrates our world with such fluency we rarely question it, one that tells the story of us, even when it's making it up as it goes. The inner narrator, the voice that's always watching. You walk into a room, and there it is. The voice, not out loud, not shouting, but always present, commenting, judging, narrating your steps like you're a character in a novel only it is reading. That's the inner narrator, the invisible storyteller that follows you everywhere. It tells you what kind of person you are, what other people think, whether you're doing well or failing quietly. It takes raw experience and turns it into meaning, into judgment, into identity, and most of the time you never question it. Because it doesn't sound like a stranger, it sounds like you, like truth. But what if it isn't? What if that voice isn't neutral or even honest? What if it's an echo of every criticism you've ever internalized, every standard you failed to meet, every belief you've absorbed without noticing? It pretends to narrate reality, but often it narrates your fear. You fumble a word, and it says you're awkward. You get rejected, and it says you're unlovable. You win something, and it whispers you didn't deserve it. It doesn't just describe your life, it edits it. It remembers the wounds. It loops the failure tapes, and sometimes it creates entire problems out of thin air just to keep the story going. Because stories give us structure, and the inner narrator craves structure more than peace. It wants things to make sense, even if the sense it makes is painful. You think it's guiding you, but sometimes it's holding you in place. You believe it's helping you grow, but often it's helping you conform to an outdated image of who you're supposed to be. And because it's always there, you rarely notice how loud it's become, until silence feels unbearable. But here's the strange part. That voice isn't a lie. Not entirely. It's trying to help. It wants to protect you, to prepare you, to keep you from embarrassment, pain, rejection. It believes if it can control the narrative, it can control the outcome. But it can't, because life isn't a script. It's messy, and you're not a fixed character. You're unfolding. Still, the voice persists, because deep inside the mind, something is always watching, always commenting, always trying to maintain control. And sometimes it raises a deeper question, one we rarely ask. Who exactly is narrating? And who is listening? Split selves. Who's actually in control? You promise yourself you'll change. You mean it. You prepare, plan, visualize the new version of you, and then you do the opposite. Why? It's not weakness. It's not failure. It's something older than both. Conflict. The mind isn't one unified voice. It's a chorus, a collection of selves with different goals, fears, and desires. And sometimes they don't agree. One part of you wants growth. Another wants safety. One wants adventure. Another craves routine. One reaches forward while the other pulls back, and you feel stuck. Because no one part gets to steer forever. This is the reality of split selves. You are not a single, coherent I. You are a shifting blend of identities that rise and fall, depending on mood, memory, and environment. The self who sets goals at night is not the self who wakes up tired. The self who forgives is not the self who gets triggered again. We change subtly and constantly. And we act like that's a problem. Like inconsistency means something is wrong. But maybe inconsistency is just the truth of being human. You were not designed to be static. And yet, we expect coherence. We expect every part of us to agree. We think self-control means domination. One voice ruling the others, but control doesn't last. The part of you that takes charge today might lose its grip tomorrow. So what do? Most of us pick a version of ourselves and try to silence the rest. We shame our doubt, suppress our fear, exile our need. We pretend to be one thing, clean and simple. But the more we suppress, the louder those hidden parts become. Until one day, they take the wheel, not out of malice, but out of need. Because the part you ignore still lives in you, still feels, still remembers. And it will find a way to speak through hesitation, procrastination, self-destruction, or silence. So the question isn't, why can't I stay consistent? It's, which version of me is hurting right now? Because when you start to listen to the parts you'd rather avoid, something shifts. You begin to see the logic in the sabotage, the wisdom in the fear, the pattern in the chaos, and you realize the conflict inside you isn't brokenness. It's a conversation, and sometimes the part pulling you back isn't trying to ruin your life. It's trying to protect it. Self-sabotage as safety. Why you ruin what you think you want. You get close to success and suddenly you stop trying. You enter a healthy relationship and pick a fight. You begin to heal and then disappear into old habits. It looks like failure, but underneath, something else is happening. Self-sabotage isn't always about laziness or fear of hard work. Sometimes it's about protection. A quiet inner logic that says, if I ruin this now, I won't be surprised when it breaks. Because success is risky, love is risky, vulnerability is dangerous, and if you've been hurt before, abandoned, embarrassed, blindsided, then the mind learns a brutal lesson. It's safer to lose on your own terms than to hope and be crushed. So you pull the trigger before life can. You procrastinate on the thing that matters most. You ghost the person who finally treats you well. You numb, retreat, sabotage, not because you want to fail, but because failure you choose feels better than betrayal you don't see coming. And the logic is twisted, but it's not stupid. Because the brain remembers, it catalogs pain, stores it deep, and builds defenses around it. And sometimes those defenses look like destruction. Not of the threat, but of the opportunity. You think you're afraid of failing, but often you're more afraid of succeeding because success raises the stakes. It says you're worth something. It says you care, and caring makes you vulnerable. So instead, you retreat to what's familiar. You sabotage because staying stuck is predictable. It's safe. It confirms an identity you already know how to live inside. It keeps the world small, but manageable. And part of you believes that safety is the same as peace. But it's not. It's just control in disguise. Because when you sabotage yourself, you stay in control of the outcome, even if it hurts. And sometimes, hurting by your own hand feels less terrifying than the hope that someone or something might let you down. But every time you do this, something else happens too. You prove the old wound right. You confirm the belief that you're not ready, not lovable, not meant for more. And over time, that belief becomes your identity. But sabotage isn't the root. It's a symptom, a signal from an old part of you that still believes pain is coming, that joy is a trick, that if you try, you'll be exposed. And until that part is heard, it will keep repeating the same cycle, the same decision, the same pattern you swore you'd never fall into again. Repetition compulsion. Why you keep reliving what hurt you. You leave the toxic relationship only to find yourself in another one just like it. You escape the chaos you grew up with, only to recreate it in your career, your friendships, your private life. You swore you'd never go back, and somehow, you never really left. This is repetition compulsion. The unconscious pull to relive the very dynamics that once wounded us. Not because we enjoy the pain, but because the pain is familiar, and familiarity feels safe, even when it's killing us. The psyche does this not out of cruelty, but out of hope. It's trying to master the original wound, to rewrite the ending, to win, finally, where we once lost. So we seek out similar situations, similar people, similar roles. We find ourselves back in the same emotional landscape, different scenery, same storm, and we think, maybe this time it will be different. But it rarely is, because what we're acting out isn't conscious. It's a pattern running underneath, invisible but powerful, a script written in childhood, in trauma, in silence. And every time we step into the old role, it deepens the groove. It's why survivors of emotional neglect often chase emotionally distant partners, why children of chaos often create crisis and calm, why we keep choosing the familiar ache over the unknown peace. Because peace feels alien, and the brain doesn't trust what it doesn't recognize. It prefers the predictable pain of repetition over the frightening vulnerability of change. And part of us believes that if we can just get it right this time, if we can fix them, earn it, endure it, we can finally heal what never got resolved. But healing doesn't happen through reenactment. It happens through rupture, through awareness, through interrupting the loop long enough to ask, what am I really chasing? Because repetition isn't just about the other person. It's about the role we play, the mask we put on, the identity we shrink into. And until we question that role, we keep performing the same scene. Again and again, different name, different face, same script. And the longer we play it, the more convincing it becomes. We start to believe that this is all we're capable of, that love must always hurt, that stability must always end, that we are destined to live inside the very pattern we swore we would escape. But patterns aren't prophecy, they're echoes. And echoes can fade if we stop repeating the call. The choice isn't easy, but it is possible, and it begins with stepping off the stage and asking who you are without the script. The mask of identity. Who are you without the role? You describe yourself in a few words. Maybe your job, your personality, your preferences. I'm ambitious. I'm shy. I'm the reliable one. It feels honest. But is it? Or is it a mask you've worn so long you forgot you put it on? Identity gives us stability. It helps us move through a chaotic world with something solid to hold on to. But sometimes, the identity we cling to isn't who we are, it's who we had to become to survive. We play roles: the fixer, the smart one, the funny one, the strong one, the people pleaser, the quiet observer. Roles that formed early when we learned what parts of us were safe to show and which parts were not. Over time, those roles calcify. They become scripts, and the world reinforces them. People expect you to be a certain way, and you deliver, not because it's true, but because it's familiar, expected, rewarded. But what happens when the role starts to hurt? When being the caretaker leaves you drained? When being the achiever leaves you hollow? When being the peacekeeper silences your rage? You feel stuck, but you can't imagine who you'd be without the role, because the mask has fused to your face. And here's the trick: the more successful the identity, the harder it is to question. You get praised for it, promoted for it, loved for it. But that love often comes with a condition: don't change. Stay reliable. Stay small. Stay what we need you to be. So we protect the mask, even when it suffocates us. Because dropping it means risking rejection, confusion, grief. It means facing the question, If I stop performing, will I still be loved? And underneath that is a deeper fear. If I'm not who I thought I was, then who am I? But identity isn't a prison. It's a process. And the self is not a fixed point. It's a shifting field. Who you were at 15 is not who you'll be at 50. And that's not failure. That's growth. But growth requires loss. You have to let go of what once protected you. You have to take off the mask. Not to reject it, but to see what's underneath. And sometimes what you find isn't weakness. It's the part of you that never got to speak. But before that voice can rise, something else must fall. The defenses that kept the mask in place. Defense mechanisms. How the mind hides from pain. You feel something rise. Grief, shame, fear, and instantly, the mind steps in. It redirects, distracts, reframes. You don't even notice it happening. 1 second, you're on the edge of feeling something unbearable. The next, you're scrolling, blaming, laughing, forgetting. This is not weakness. It's protection. Defense mechanisms are the psyche's emergency systems, the mind's way of shielding itself from truths it isn't ready to face. Not forever, but long enough to survive. And they're everywhere. You deny what's obvious. You rationalize what's harmful. You project your anger. You repress your needs. You intellectualize your heartbreak, turn sorrow into sarcasm, transform guilt into control. Because raw emotion is sharp, and sometimes, feeling it all would tear something open. So the mind intervenes, not to deceive you, but to preserve you. The child who wasn't allowed to cry becomes the adult who never feels. The teen who learned love was conditional becomes the adult who keeps their guard up. The person who once felt powerless becomes obsessed with control. These defenses make sense. They were brilliant adaptations to impossible situations, but the problem is, they don't know when to stop. What protected you once begins to imprison you now. You don't just suppress pain, you suppress joy. You don't just avoid conflict, you avoid connection. You don't just rationalize others' bad behavior, you excuse your own. And the hardest part is that most of it happens unconsciously. You think you're making choices, but often you're just following old scripts, written in panic, edited by survival, repeated until they feel like personality. But personality isn't set in stone, it's a defense with a name. And when we start to notice these defenses, when we catch ourselves deflecting, escaping, attacking, we create a gap, a moment, a chance to pause and ask, what am I really protecting? Because the defense always points to the wound. Sometimes it's easier to stay numb than to admit we're still hurting. Sometimes it's easier to stay angry than to feel powerless. And sometimes we build our entire lives around the idea that nothing can touch us just to keep the pain from surfacing. But pain doesn't vanish when ignored. It hides in decisions, in patterns, in the roles we play without realizing. And if you can trace it back, if you can sit with what the defense was trying to hide, you don't just gain insight, you gain choice. But of all the defenses we cling to, there's one that feels the most noble, the most justified, the most difficult to let go of. The one that says, I have to be right. The need to be right, why being correct feels like survival. You feel the tension rise in your chest. The argument begins. You know your point is solid, you know it, and yet, the longer the disagreement goes on, the less it becomes about the facts, and the more it becomes about you. This isn't just debate, it's identity defense. The need to be right isn't about ego alone, it's about survival. At a deep psychological level, correctness feels like control, like safety, like worth, and when someone challenges your version of reality, it doesn't just feel wrong, it feels dangerous. Because if they're right, what does that make you? Being wrong threatens more than the argument. It threatens your worldview, your credibility, your place in the tribe. The mind responds to that threat with urgency. escalating tone, shifting goalposts, reaching for whatever logic it takes to win. Because winning feels like existence, and the brain rewards it. Being right activates pleasure centers. It gives us a hit of validation, a sense of clarity in a chaotic world. We like feeling certain not because it's always helpful, but because it's emotionally stabilizing. But that stability comes at a cost. The moment we value being right over being real, we stop listening. We interrupt. We inflate our memory, distort the facts, reduce others to straw men. We'd rather protect the self than investigate the truth. And the smarter we are, the better we are at it. We collect evidence not to explore, but to defend. We turn logic into a sword. We build arguments like armor, forgetting that underneath it all, we might be wrong. But wrongness doesn't mean worthlessness, and truth isn't a possession. It's a process, one that requires humility, curiosity, a willingness to hold two possibilities in your mind and say, I might not know everything yet. But that kind of openness is rare, because it requires letting go of the illusion that control and correctness are the same thing. They're not. Because being right might keep you comfortable, but being open might actually change you. And sometimes, all it takes is hearing someone speak, not for the facts they offer, but for the emotion underneath. Because emotion too spreads, invisible, contagious, and we often absorb more than we realize. Emotional contagion, how we catch what others feel. You walk into a room and sense it instantly. Something's off. No one says anything, but the air feels heavier. You feel your posture shift, your tone soften or sharpen. You start to match the room. That's not empathy. It's contagion. Emotional contagion is the invisible transmission of mood from one person to another. It doesn't ask for permission. It bypasses logic. It travels through mirror neurons, subtle cues, the way someone exhales or avoids eye contact. One anxious person can infect a whole group. One calm presence can anchor a storm. We are social creatures, built to sync, to feel what others feel so we can belong, cooperate, survive. But that syncing doesn't always serve us. Because sometimes we don't just notice emotion, we absorb it. We carry someone else's sadness and wonder why we're tired. We feel shame after a conversation and don't know where it came from. We lash out after being around anger without knowing we're mirroring, not initiating. And this happens fast. Before thought, before understanding, emotion jumps the gap. Like static electricity. You don't choose it. You catch it. This is how moods spread across teams, families, entire communities. A single tone can shift the direction of a meeting. A single facial expression can define the mood of a household. And sometimes, emotional contagion lasts longer than the person who started it. You might carry your parents' fear long after you've moved out. You might replicate your partner's self-doubt even after they've changed. You might internalize a stranger's cruelty and not realize it's still echoing in your nervous system. Because emotion, when left unexamined, becomes a template, a way of being that feels like personality, but is really residue. And the danger is, we start mistaking what we've absorbed for what we actually feel. You think you're angry, but you've just been in proximity to rage. You think you're hopeless, but you've soaked up someone else's despair. You mistake contagion for identity. And when that happens often enough, you forget what your baseline even feels like. You lose track of where others end and you begin. But you can interrupt the loop, not by rejecting emotion, but by recognizing where it came from. By asking, is this mine? Do I want to carry it? Because some feelings were never yours to hold. And some stories you carry didn't begin with you. They were absorbed, passed down, echoed, but you don't have to keep repeating them. You can choose to rewrite. The stories we tell to survive, how we turn pain into meaning. Something happens. It hurts. And almost instantly, the mind begins to weave. Not just memory, but story. A reason, a pattern, a sentence that starts with, "This happened because." It's instinct, survival. We tell stories to explain what shouldn't have happened. To make sense of the senseless, we turn chaos into order, even if the order is cruel. I was weak. I deserved it. This is just how life is. Not because those things are true, but because they give the pain somewhere to live. A frame. Without a story, suffering floats. It lingers without shape. It haunts. But once it's placed inside a narrative, it becomes manageable, endurable, even purposeful. So we make meaning even if the meaning wounds us. We say it made us stronger, or that it had to happen, or that we're better for it. Sometimes that's real. Sometimes it's a coping mechanism dressed as wisdom. But either way, it protects us, because humans can endure almost anything, as long as the story makes sense. The problem is, the story often starts before we're old enough to know we're writing it. A parent leaves, and we think it's our fault. We're mistreated and we decide that's love. We try, fail, and write a script called "I'm Not Enough." These aren't just ideas, they become identities. And identities shape what we allow, what we chase, what we sabotage. A story becomes a filter, and over time, we stop seeing life for what it is. We see it for what we expect. So when good things come, we question them. When bad things come, we say, "Of course." We call it realism, but it's just repetition, because the story hasn't changed. And sometimes we hold on to the pain, not because we want to suffer, but because we've built too much around it. Letting go of the story means letting go of the explanation, the protection, the self we've learned to live inside. But you are not your story. You are the storyteller. And you can pause, reword, unfold a new version that holds the truth, but doesn't worship the wound, that honors what happened without making it your future. But sometimes the stories don't come right away. Sometimes the mind can't make meaning fast enough. And when the truth hits too hard, it doesn't rewrite it. It shuts the book entirely. Denial as a spiritual reflex, the mind's final line of defense. You hear the news, you feel the shift, the silence after the phone call, the weight of the diagnosis, the betrayal you never thought would happen, and your first thought isn't always pain. Sometimes it's nothing at all, just stillness, a blankness, as if reality hasn't quite arrived yet. That's denial. Not a conscious choice, but a reflex. A final psychological shield that rises when truth threatens to overwhelm. Before sorrow, before rage, before collapse, there is denial. It is not a lie. It is a pause, a way for the soul to catch up. Denial says, "Not yet." Not because the mind doesn't understand, but because it understands too well. It feels the earthquake coming and freezes the frame. It slows time, holds reality at the edge of perception so the body has a chance to brace. It shows up in the small moments. The way you laugh at something terrifying. The way you keep going through the motions after everything has changed. The way you say "I'm fine" and almost believe it. Because denial is spiritual. It's not just psychological defense, it's existential insulation. It lets us survive the impossible, absorb the unbearable in doses. It's what lets a soldier walk through carnage, a parent function through grief, a person rise from the ashes without shattering into dust. But denial doesn't last. It can't. Reality always returns. Slowly at first, then all at once. A detail, a memory, a moment when the illusion falters. And when it does, it hurts more than before, because now the truth has shape. And when the truth has shape, it asks something of you. It demands presence, response, change. It forces you to stand where you've been avoiding, to feel what you've buried, to name what's been locked behind the shield. But that's when healing can begin. Not in the moment we flinch from truth, but in the moment we start to let it in. And yet there's a danger in staying there. Because when denial becomes identity, we don't just ignore the truth, we resist transformation. We stop growing. We mistake stillness for strength, numbness for wisdom, apathy for resilience. We wear denial like armor, forgetting that armor doesn't breathe. And in a world flooded with information, where truths crash into us daily, it's easy to stay hidden, to let denial become the atmosphere. But something in us still feels, still flinches, still knows. And when enough people feel it at once, that silence can erupt into something else entirely. Stinks in a digital age, when consensus replaces thought. You scroll, you see the likes, the comments, the shares. You feel it. Some posts glow with approval, others carry a faint shame. You pause before you speak. You hesitate before you click. You want to say what you mean, but first you wonder, what will everyone else think? This is the modern herd instinct. In ancient times, it kept us alive. Belonging meant protection. Isolation meant death. So we watched the tribe. We mirrored behavior. We sensed what was safe by what others accepted. It wasn't weakness. It was survival. And it still is. But the tribe has changed. Now the village isn't a campfire. It's a feed, a network, a massive shifting crowd of eyes. The stakes are no longer just social, they're algorithmic. Your relevance, your visibility, your sense of self, shaped by digital consensus. And that consensus spreads fast. Someone voices outrage, and it multiplies. Someone gets praised, and their words become truth. The louder the opinion, the safer it feels to echo it. Not because it's right, but because it's accepted. We don't just follow the herd, we become it. It's not that we stop thinking. It's that we start thinking through others. We look sideways before we look inward. We wait for cues before forming convictions. And slowly, our own voice dims beneath the weight of what's trending. We outsource our values. We trade discomfort for agreement. We learn to anticipate the applause and preempt the criticism. And eventually, we stop asking what we believe. We only ask, what's safe to say? Even dissent becomes performative. You challenge the group, but only within the new group that rewards the challenge. You break from the herd just enough to join a new one, because true isolation still terrifies us. But here's the danger. When fear of rejection outweighs the desire for truth, conformity becomes camouflage. We lose nuance. We flatten ideas into slogans. We trade insight for belonging. And sometimes we don't even realize we're doing it, because the line between social intelligence and self-erasure is thin. And in a world moving this fast, it's easier to adopt a view than to build one. To feel right by being surrounded, not by being still. We praise consensus like it's wisdom. But consensus can be inertia. It can be fear. It can be a wave that sweeps away individuality, leaving behind only echoes. But the crowd isn't always wise. And when everyone's watching the same signal, it's easy to mistake noise for clarity, and clarity for truth. Especially when all that matters is whether someone else has already agreed. Social proof. Why we trust the crowd more than ourselves. You walk past two restaurants. One is empty, the other buzzing with people. You've never heard of either, but without thinking, you pick the busy one. Not because of logic, because of signal. That's social proof. The idea that if others are doing it, it must be right. If others believe it, it must be true. If enough people approve, maybe you should too. It feels like intuition, but it's imitation. Social proof is ancient. It helped our ancestors decide what was safe to eat, where to find shelter, when to flee. If the group ran, you ran. If the group stayed calm, you stayed. Thinking for yourself was dangerous when time was short and threats were real. But the threats have changed. Now we're navigating information, not predators. Opinions, not lions. Belief systems, not survival shelters. And still we look to others before we trust ourselves. You see a product with thousands of 5-star reviews and assume it's good. You watch a video because it went viral. You believe a comment thread full of agreement. You nod during a conversation even if you disagree, because everyone else is nodding too. Over time, your personal compass gets replaced by a collective one. That compass doesn't always point to truth. Popularity doesn't guarantee value. It signals visibility. It reveals momentum, the advantage of arriving early or being loudest. Yet the brain often skips those checks. It sees the crowd and assumes the crowd must know something. Even when we know better, even when we want to think independently, social proof has gravity. It pulls at our sense of doubt. It whispers, "You might be wrong. They all believe this. Don't be the only one who doesn't." So we align. Sometimes subtly, we nod, scroll, like, agree, not because it fits, but because it feels easier, less risky, less lonely. The more we do it, the more the crowd becomes our reality, even when it's shallow, even when it's false. Social proof doesn't just shape what we buy. It shapes what we believe, what we say out loud, what we allow ourselves to question. When something is repeated enough, it becomes hard not to absorb it. Repetition begins to feel like truth, even when it's just noise. In a world where silence gets punished and visibility is currency, we follow the crowd, not to find meaning, but to avoid exile. Our deepest need isn't always clarity. Often it's connection, and nothing pulls us toward that faster than the illusion that everyone else is already there. Tribalism and belonging. The price of feeling at home. You find your people. They speak your language, share your values, laugh at your jokes, and for the first time in a long time, you exhale. Belonging feels like safety, like coming in from the cold. It's one of our oldest needs. We're wired to seek it, to feel anchored in something larger than ourselves. A family, a culture, a cause, a side. But tribalism doesn't just offer connection, it demands allegiance. And that demand is subtle. At first it feels like loyalty, like unity, but slowly it becomes expectation, agreement, conformity. The cost of belonging is often silence, and the currency is compromise. You start to filter what you say, what you post, what questions you're willing to ask. Not because you've changed your mind, but because you don't want to risk your place in the group. So you hide your doubt, you flatten your nuance, you echo the safe opinion, and over time, you forget what your unfiltered voice even sounded like. Because tribes reward clarity, not complexity, identity, not ambiguity. And once you're inside, it's hard to leave. Not just because you'd lose connection, but because the tribe often defines itself by who it opposes. You're not just with us, you're against them. And walking away doesn't just feel like loss, it feels like betrayal. So we stay, we adapt, we trade quiet truths for loud solidarity, and we convince ourselves that this is what belonging means. But there's a difference between connection and containment. True belonging allows for questions, for difference, for growth. Tribalism doesn't. It says, here are the rules. Here's the narrative. Here's what we believe. And if you question that too often, too loudly, too thoughtfully, you risk exile. The exile isn't always explicit. It can come in the form of silence, of being left out, dismissed, unfollowed, Sometimes all it takes is a raised eyebrow or a shift in tone to feel the boundary being drawn, and so we internalize the rules. We self-police. We stop expressing, not because we've been silenced, but because we've learned to preempt rejection. We tell ourselves we're safe, that we've found our people, but safety that depends on agreement isn't really safety. It's performance, and performances are exhausting. Over time, we shrink ourselves to fit the tribe. We abandon nuance in favor of clarity. We let belonging replace curiosity. But real connection doesn't require agreement. It requires courage. The courage to be seen, not just for what we echo, but for what we question. And in a world of rising division, where identity is often formed in opposition, the pressure to pick a side grows louder by the day. And when everyone's speaking in unison, doubt starts to sound like a threat. Groupthink and the death of doubt, when agreement becomes the only truth. You sit in a room full of people. Someone shares an idea. Everyone nods. You feel a flicker of hesitation. Something doesn't sit right. But no one else says a word. So you swallow the doubt. Smile. Nod along. This is groupthink, and it feels like unity. But underneath, something vital is dying. Doubt. Doubt is uncomfortable, inconvenient. It slows things down, complicates decisions, forces us to question what seems settled. But it's also what keeps us honest. It's the engine of progress, the beginning of clarity, the first crack in an illusion. Groupthink buries that crack before it has a chance to widen. It replaces curiosity with consensus, questions with slogans. It rewards harmony over truth, and punishes dissent, not with punishment, but with silence, awkwardness, distance. You sense it in meetings, in movements, in communities where every answer sounds rehearsed and every disagreement feels like betrayal. The group becomes a chorus, and soon everyone is singing the same tune, not because they believe it, but because it's easier than singing alone. And the more the tune repeats, the more it sounds like truth, even when it's flawed, even when it's dangerous. Because when doubt disappears, certainty takes its place, and certainty unchecked doesn't seek feedback. It doesn't listen. It builds walls around the idea, then calls the wall reality. But real thinking is messy. It loops, falters, contradicts. It asks uncomfortable questions and waits for uncomfortable answers. Groupthink skips that part. It hands you the answer prepackaged and expects you to defend it. Not because it's yours, but because it's ours. And there's comfort in that. Belonging through agreement, identity through echo. It feels safe to be surrounded by people who think just like you. But if no one can say what they're really thinking, is it unity or is it fear? Sometimes we tell ourselves we're aligned, but what we really are is silent. And in that silence, something happens. We forget how to doubt. We forget that disagreement isn't an attack, that not knowing isn't failure, that asking what if isn't weakness. Because by the time the idea has been repeated enough times, by the time it's been liked, shared, amplified, and absorbed, it doesn't feel like an opinion anymore. It feels like fact. And when the group speaks with one voice for long enough, eventually you stop listening for your own. Mimicry as survival, why we mirror to stay safe. You're in a new room. You don't know the rules yet. You watch. You wait. And slowly, without realizing, you start to shift. You mirror the tone, match the energy, laugh a second too late, just to keep up. This isn't strategy. It's instinct. Mimicry is one of the oldest survival tools we have. From the moment we're born, we begin copying the faces around us. Smiles, frowns, rhythms of speech. It's how we learn what's safe, what's welcomed, what will keep us close. In evolution, blending in meant staying alive. Standing out meant being left behind. So the brain developed shortcuts, mirror neurons, social tracking, emotional mimicry. We become what we're around. And we still do. You take on your friend's phrasing, their laugh, their posture. You dress like your peers without knowing why. You repeat opinions not because you've examined them, but because they echo the room. It doesn't feel like performance. It feels like connection. But mimicry can be dangerous when it overrides authenticity. Because if you're always shifting to match, you start to lose track of what was originally yours. Your voice gets softer, your edges blur. You forget where imitation ends and identity begins. This isn't about weakness, it's about wiring. And for many, especially those shaped by trauma, mimicry isn't just social, it's defensive. You learn to read moods like weather, adjust your tone to prevent explosions, shape-shift your personality to avoid rejection. It works. It keeps the peace. It earns approval. But it comes at a cost. Because when the mask never drops, even you start to believe it's your real face. And over time, chronic mimicry creates a kind of internal silence. You're so attuned to what others need you to be that you stop asking who you are when no one's watching. But identity formed under pressure isn't identity. It's camouflage. And when enough people in a room are mimicking, everyone becomes a reflection. The group feels connected, but no one is truly seen. Still, mimicry persists, because the moment someone rises above the pattern, breaks the tone, challenges the energy, it disrupts safety. It tests the hierarchy. And when a group relies on sameness, even a tiny act of individuality can feel like defiance, especially when we've learned that the safest thing to do is follow the leader. The authority reflex, why we obey without thinking. You're told what to do, not asked, not persuaded, just told, with confidence, with a badge, with a tone that doesn't waver, and before you question it, you nod. You comply, you move, not because it makes sense, but because someone said it with authority. This is the authority reflex, the deeply wired tendency to trust power, especially when it speaks without hesitation. It's not reasoned, it's automatic, a shortcut built into the social brain. In small tribes, authority meant survival. A leader gave orders to protect the group. Obeying didn't just signal loyalty, it increased your odds of staying alive. And so evolution favored the instinct to defer. We still carry that instinct. You see it in classrooms, in offices, in hospitals. A person in a uniform makes a claim, and most people stop asking questions. You see it in cults, in corporations, in everyday life, where tone carries more weight than truth. Confidence convinces, even when it's hollow, and the more formal the title, the more unquestioned the command. We're taught to respect authority, but respect often blurs into obedience. And obedience, when unconscious, becomes dangerous, because authority doesn't guarantee wisdom, or goodness, or care. It only guarantees influence. And the reflex to submit doesn't ask whether the power is being used well, it only reacts to the presence of power. Even the posture of authority, firm voice, eye contact, fast decisions can shut down doubt before it starts. People go along, not because they agree, but because resistance feels risky. And when the cost of questioning is embarrassment, punishment, or exclusion, most people choose silence. But silence isn't always agreement. Sometimes it's fear, dressed up as trust. And when enough people obey without reflection, truth becomes optional. Reality becomes scripted, not by evidence, but by whoever holds the microphone. And if that microphone belongs to someone who prizes status over substance, the lines between leadership and performance begin to blur. Status games we don't admit we're playing. The quiet contest beneath everyday life. You post something thoughtful. You check the likes. You say it didn't matter, but you still check. Someone walks into the room, and without thinking, you adjust. A tone, a word, a posture, just enough to register. You weren't told to play, but you're playing. Status isn't something we chase explicitly. It's something we orbit. Subtly. Constantly. The need to matter, to be seen, to feel important. Most of us don't call it status. We call it ambition, or confidence, or influence. But underneath, it's the same engine. And it's ancient. In every tribe, every system, every group, status shaped survival. Higher status meant more resources, more protection, more mates, more say. The instincts didn't vanish. They evolved. Now they show up as competition disguised as conversation, as image management disguised as authenticity, as subtle one-upmanship at dinner tables and meetings and online feeds. And most of the time, we don't even know we're doing it. We measure ourselves in invisible metrics: who gets heard, who gets followed, who gets deferred to. And the games vary depending on the setting. In one space, it's intellect. In another, it's beauty. Elsewhere, it's humility, or outrage, or nonchalance. The rules are fluid, but the goal stays the same: to rise even a little. And this pursuit isn't always toxic. Wanting respect is human. Wanting recognition isn't weakness. But when status becomes the silent metric behind every interaction, it warps connection. We stop listening to understand. We listen to win. We stop expressing to connect. We perform to be seen. And the danger of these games is not that they exist, but that they hide. We convince ourselves we're above them, that we're not playing, that we're just being ourselves. But the self has been shaped by 1,000 silent contests. And when everyone's performing, even just a little, no one really feels known. So we keep polishing, curating, competing, while telling ourselves we're not trying at all. 'Cause to admit you're playing the game feels like losing it. But what happens when the game intensifies? When status stops being about subtle gestures and becomes enforced by the people around you? Peer pressure and the erosion of self when fitting in costs too much. You're in a room where everyone agrees. You feel the tension in your chest, the flicker of hesitation in your gut, but you stay quiet. You nod. You laugh on cue. It's not fear, exactly. It's something more practiced. Peer pressure isn't loud. It doesn't always look like coercion. Sometimes it looks like belonging, like a raised eyebrow, a delayed reply, a moment of silence just long enough to make you question yourself. You conform, not because you've changed your mind, but because the cost of speaking feels heavier than the cost of silence. This is how the self begins to erode. It starts small. A shifted opinion, a censored sentence, a subtle edit of how you show up. You adjust not for truth, but for approval. You tuck away the parts of yourself that might make others uncomfortable. And the more you do it, the more you forget they're there. Peer pressure doesn't need a threat. It just needs an atmosphere. One where difference feels dangerous. Where conformity feels like virtue. Where silence feels like wisdom, even when it's fear. You start to anticipate disapproval before it happens. You filter your instincts before they form. And soon, the pressure doesn't come from outside. It lives in you. You become your own censor. And it works. You fit in. You're praised. You're unbothered. On the surface, you're fine. But underneath, something is missing. Your voice. Your complexity. Your ability to disagree without feeling unsafe. Because the longer you stay in a space that doesn't tolerate divergence, the harder it becomes to tell where the pressure ends and where you begin. This is how identity fades, not in a moment, but in 1,000 small silences. And those silences accumulate. They begin to reshape your internal dialogue. You stop entertaining certain thoughts, not because they're untrue, but because they don't feel allowed. You start pre-editing your personality before you walk into a room. Eventually, the mask becomes muscle memory. You smile when you're supposed to. You agree reflexively. You become fluent in the language of fitting in. And slowly, you start to convince yourself that this edited version is who you really are. But deep down, a tension grows. A quiet friction between what you say and what you feel. A sense that you're shrinking, not evolving. That your belonging is conditional, not earned. And all the while, the group nods in unison. Not because everyone believes, but because no one wants to be the first to stand alone. And when standing alone feels like failure, people don't speak truth. They perform it. Virtue signaling. When morality becomes a performance, you say the right thing. You post the right message. You align with the correct cause. Not always because you believe it deeply, but because you know it signals something. It says, I'm one of the good ones. Virtue signaling is the act of demonstrating moral correctness, not necessarily to make a difference, but to be seen making it. It's not always dishonest, but it's not always honest either. It exists in the blurry space between integrity and impression. It starts with a real impulse, the desire to stand for something, to speak out, to care. But in a hyper-visible world, where identity is currency and silence is suspect, that impulse can get hijacked by the need to appear righteous. So we craft our stance. We amplify the message. We broadcast the values we know will land well, not for change, but for approval. And the more approval we get, the more we believe we've done something meaningful. But approval isn't the same as impact. Because virtue signaling often stops at the signal. It doesn't ask hard questions. It doesn't take uncomfortable action. It performs the morality without carrying its weight. We don't just want to be good. We want to be seen as good. And in the right group, at the right time, the appearance of virtue is worth more than virtue itself. This performance becomes addictive. The likes, the validation, the sense of alignment. And over time, the signal becomes the goal. We forget to ask if our values cost us anything, if they push us to grow, if they still belong to us, or if they've become a costume. But when morality turns into theater, its power dissolves. We speak the words, we share the image, but inside we haven't shifted. We haven't risked anything. We haven't examined the ways we benefit from the very systems we condemn. Virtue signaling is easy. Living your values is not. And in a culture driven by optics, the temptation to perform will always be stronger than the call to transform. But real virtue doesn't always go viral. Sometimes it's quiet, unseen, unrewarded. And sometimes it even makes you unpopular, especially when the crowd's morality begins to tilt toward exclusion, toward love that only exists inside the lines, and hate for anyone who lives beyond them. In-group love versus out-group hate, the shadow beneath belonging. You find your circle, you feel accepted, seen, you speak, and people nod. You feel warmth, loyalty, protection. But then someone else enters the room, someone who doesn't belong, and the mood shifts. This is the double edge of group identity. Love for those inside often pairs with suspicion, if not hostility, toward those outside. We talk about community, unity, solidarity. But what we rarely admit is that many groups define themselves not just by what they value, but by what they reject. The in-group gives us safety, but sometimes it needs an enemy to feel strong. And so we exaggerate difference. We flatten outsiders into caricatures. We assign motives without listening. We bond not just over shared values, but shared opposition. This isn't new. It's ancient. Tribes survive by distinguishing friend from threat. We are wired to notice us and them. It's a reflex. But in modern life, those tribal instincts don't vanish. They get repackaged into ideologies, subcultures, hashtags. And the love we feel inside the group becomes inseparable from the contempt we feel for those who question it. It feels righteous, protective, necessary, but it blinds us. Because no group is immune to error, and no outsider is wrong by default. But when our love for the in-group becomes sacred, doubt becomes betrayal. Curiosity becomes weakness. And even basic kindness toward the outgroup feels like crossing a line. So we build walls, not physical ones, but psychological, emotional. We train ourselves to look away, to assume the worst, to ignore nuance. Because nuance threatens cohesion, and cohesion is sacred. But the stronger the walls, the harder it becomes to grow. We stop asking real questions. We stop listening. We stop imagining what it's like to stand on the other side. And as the group gets tighter, the rules get stricter. Suddenly, there's a script to follow, an emotional tone to match, a list of enemies that keeps expanding. Love begins to feel conditional, not based on who you are, but on how well you conform. And when you slip, even slightly, the warmth cools, the nods fade, the silence stretches longer. You feel the chill of distance from the very group that once felt like home. Love that only extends to those who agree with us isn't love. It's comfort. And belonging that demands enemies will always need someone to cast out. So we watch as communities harden, as identities radicalize, as the space between us and them becomes too wide to cross. And behind it all, one fear echoes louder than the rest. If I don't hate who they hate, will I still be loved? The terror of rejection. Why exclusion hurts like a wound. You feel it before you name it. A shift in tone. A door that doesn't open. A message left unread. It's not violence. It's absence. But it burns all the same. Rejection doesn't just sting. It shatters. The human brain processes social pain through the same neural pathways as physical pain. To be excluded is to be wounded, literally. Because for most of our evolutionary history, rejection meant death. You needed the tribe to survive. Alone meant exposed. Alone meant doomed. So even now, when we're ghosted, dismissed, unfollowed, overlooked, we don't just feel sad. We feel unsafe. That's why rejection hits deeper than disappointment. It makes us question not just what we did, but who we are. It activates shame, doubt, a panic that says, "You're not wanted. You don't belong." And in that moment, everything narrows. Logic fades. The body braces. The story of self begins to fracture. Because rejection doesn't just isolate, it disorients. You replay the conversation. You scan your tone, your words, your timing. You look for clues. You imagine how you were seen. You imagine how you weren't. And somewhere in that spiral, the question rises, what's wrong with me? That's the real terror, not the loss of connection, but the loss of worth. And so we adapt. We shrink. We soften the edges. We preempt the no. We become smaller, quieter, easier to like, not because we want to, but because the mind will do anything to avoid exile. But this protection has a price. When we live in fear of rejection, we stop being whole. We trade authenticity for acceptability. We silence truth to preserve the illusion of harmony. We hide the very parts of ourselves that long to be seen. And we tell ourselves we're safer, but the more we edit, the lonelier it gets. Because to be loved in disguise is to feel unknown. And the longer we go unseen, the more we ache for any kind of recognition, even the kind that hurts. So we reach, we compare, we compete. We scan the room not for connection, but for confirmation that we still matter. And in that search, something else awakens. Not just fear of losing what we have, but envy of what someone else does. The strange logic of jealousy, what envy is really trying to tell you. It hits before you can stop it. You see their success, their beauty, their ease, and something tightens in your chest. It's not just longing. It's not just admiration. It's jealousy. Ugly, unwelcome, undeniable. You tell yourself it's irrational. You have your own path. You know better, but the feeling lingers because jealousy isn't just a reaction, it's a signal. It's the mind's distorted attempt to highlight what you're afraid you'll never have. It says, they have it, you don't, and that matters. But here's the twist. Jealousy rarely points at the thing itself. It points at a deeper hunger. Not just for the outcome, but for what it represents: respect, attention, ease, love, freedom. And when we believe there's not enough to go around, someone else's gain feels like our loss. So we flinch, we resent, we compare. But comparison is never neutral. It twists perception. We magnify their strengths and minimize our own. We forget context. We imagine their inner world as smooth, complete, untouched by doubt. And we wonder why we feel so small in the shadow of their imagined perfection. But jealousy doesn't mean you're petty. It means you're human. And often it means you're paying attention to something that matters to you more than you're willing to admit. That person with the book deal, maybe it's not about them. Maybe it's about the story inside you that you haven't told. That friend who always seems effortlessly social, maybe it's about your hunger for ease, connection, presence. Jealousy doesn't always point to a threat. Sometimes it points to a dream. But we don't treat it that way. We treat jealousy like poison, something to be denied, hidden, rejected. But what if it's a map? What if it's showing us not who we hate, but what we need? The envy you feel isn't proof that you're behind. It's proof that you're awake. And if you follow it without shame, if you trace it all the way back to its origin, you might find something tender, something you used to want, something you still do. And somewhere in that wanting, quietly waiting, is the shape of the love you haven't claimed yet, the kind you still ache to give. And maybe one day the kind you're finally ready to receive. Why we love who we love, the hidden architecture of attraction. It starts with a spark, a glance, a voice, a sentence that lands just right. You feel it before you understand it, a pull towards someone that defies logic. You say it's chemistry, fate, a feeling you can't explain. But there's always a pattern beneath the magic. We don't fall in love randomly. We fall into familiar shapes. We're drawn not just to who they are, but to what they awaken in us. Some remind us of home. Others remind us of a wound. Some soothe something deep inside us. Others ignite a fire we thought we'd buried. And often it's not what they do, it's what they reflect. A piece of ourselves we want to reclaim. A story we want to rewrite. A hope we never fully gave up on. Attraction is rarely about surface. It's about resonance. Sometimes we fall for someone who mirrors the parent we could never please, or the friend who always left. Sometimes we fall for safety, sometimes for chaos. And we don't always know the difference until it's too late. But every love, whether it lasts or breaks, teaches us something about who we are when we're seen and who we become when we're not. We imagine love as choice, as freedom, but much of it is inheritance, the unconscious legacy of what we learn to chase, to settle for, to crave. We seek what's familiar even when it hurts. Because the nervous system remembers, and sometimes the body relaxes, not around kindness, but around a pattern it knows how to survive. So we confuse chemistry with compatibility, intensity with intimacy, need with love. And still, we keep reaching. Because underneath every heartbreak is a question: is there someone who will choose me, not just at my best, but when I'm unraveling? The answer lives not only in who we meet, but in what we're drawn to. And more importantly, what we're finally ready to walk away from. Because the way we love is never just about desire. It's about memory. It's about survival. And whether we cling, avoid, chase, or freeze, those patterns don't come from nowhere. They come from what we learned to expect, long before we knew what love was supposed to feel like. Sometimes we find ourselves drawn to the same kind of person over and over, not because it works, but because it's familiar. The type we say we want and the type we actually fall for can look very different, and the gap between the two is where our healing waits. Love doesn't just expose our desires, it exposes our fears. It shows us where we still ache, where we still reach for a resolution we never received, and slowly, love becomes not just a connection, but a mirror, one that reflects our unfinished stories, our hidden longings, our forgotten tenderness. And in that reflection, we begin to understand. Sometimes the most transformative love isn't the one that sets us on fire. It's the one that teaches us how to stay, how to trust, how to be loved, without having to disappear. Attachment styles, the emotional blueprints we don't know we're following. You fall for someone. It's electric, uncertain, consuming. Or maybe it's calm, so calm it scares you. The way you reach, pull back, panic, or disappear isn't random. It's familiar. It's an attachment style. Long before you learned the language of love, you learned the rhythm of it. Through a caregiver's embrace or absence, through attunement or inconsistency, and that rhythm became a blueprint, a silent template for how closeness should feel. If love came with safety, you learned to trust it. If love came with anxiety, you learned to chase it. If love came with distance, you learned to stop needing it. These weren't conscious decisions, they were survival strategies. Secure, anxious, avoidant, disorganized. These are just names. The real story lives in how your body responds to intimacy. Does it soften or brace? Does it reach or retreat? Do you speak your needs or bury them? Attachment styles aren't flaws, they're adaptations. They reflect the environment that shaped you. And they often outlast the conditions they were built for. You're no longer the child, but the child's logic still lingers. So when someone gets close, your nervous system scans for danger. If closeness once meant chaos, you flinch. If silence once meant abandonment, you overreact. If affection was unpredictable, you test it. You're not broken, you're remembering. But memory doesn't have to dictate your future. The beauty of understanding your attachment style isn't to label yourself, it's to notice the pattern, to pause when the reflex rises, to ask, is this me now or me then? Healing happens in the pause, in the moment you stay instead of run, speak instead of shut down, receive instead of deflect. And no, it's not easy. Because rewiring attachment isn't about theory, it's about experience. It's about being met with a kind of love that doesn't mirror your fear. A kind of presence that stays even when you expect it to leave. And sometimes the shift begins not with words, but with a gesture, a hand that reaches for yours, a touch that says, "You're safe here." The role of touch. When skin speaks what words can't. A hand brushes yours, a shoulder leans close, a hug lingers a second longer than expected. Something shifts, not just emotionally but physiologically. Touch doesn't just feel good, it speaks. Long before language, we communicated through contact. A mother's embrace, a friend's hand on the back, the stillness of bodies resting near each other. Touch is one of the earliest ways we learn safety, connection, and presence. And when we're deprived of it, we don't just feel lonely, we feel untethered. Skin holds memory. It stores emotional codes. A gentle hand can regulate a racing heart. A single squeeze can break the dam of tears. The nervous system softens when we are held, not just metaphorically but literally. We are wired for contact. But in a world that prizes independence, we're taught to need less, to armor up, to rely on words, intellect, screens, and slowly, touch becomes rare, awkward, even suspect. So we ache in silence, not for sex or romance, but for closeness, for reassurance, for the quiet confirmation. You exist, you matter. I'm here. Touch reminds us we're real. It breaks the illusion of separateness. It slows the mind, calms the body, anchors the moment. It says what language can't without asking us to explain. And yet, many go days, weeks, even years without meaningful physical connection. Not because they want to, but because somewhere along the line, touch became transactional, or risky, or forgotten. We find ways to substitute. A weighted blanket, a pet curled beside us, a hand pressed against our own chest. These help, but they don't replace what it means to be held by another human being who chooses to stay. Because being held is more than sensation, it's recognition. It's someone saying, I see your need, and I'm not afraid of it. In moments of distress, even the most well-constructed words can fall short. But a hand placed on the back, a palm resting in another's, can speak entire volumes. Touch brings us back to the body, not just as a vessel, but as a place of comfort, a place where the heart is allowed to rest. The body remembers what it was like to be soothed through contact. And even now, in adulthood, a steady hand can silence panic. A soft palm can melt shame. A shared stillness can say, you don't have to do this alone. Touch is not a luxury, it's a language. And when spoken with care, it says you're not invisible, you're not alone. But when that touch disappears, when connection becomes scarce, something ancient in us begins to stir. A loneliness not of mood, but of meaning. Loneliness as existential alarm, what the silence is really saying. It starts as a quiet ache, a glance not returned, a day without reaching out. A stretch of time where your name doesn't cross anyone's mind. At first, it feels like stillness. Then, it begins to feel like fading. Loneliness isn't just the absence of people. It's the absence of resonance, of being known, of being held in someone else's awareness without needing to perform. We are wired for connection. Not just socially, but existentially. The brain doesn't just like company, it depends on it. Emotional regulation, immune health, cognitive clarity. These are shaped not in isolation but in relation. So when connection disappears, something ancient inside us panics. The body reads loneliness as danger. Not metaphorically, biologically. The nervous system enters a state of hypervigilance. Stress hormones spike, time distorts, thought loops tighten, and slowly, a strange kind of erosion begins. It's not that you stop existing, it's that your existence stops echoing. You speak less because no one's listening. You share less because no one asks. You start to doubt your perceptions, your memories, your worth. Loneliness isn't just sadness, it's disorientation. It fractures the story of self. It creates a hollow space where reflection should live, and in that hollow space, the mind can begin to spiral, not just into longing, but into meaninglessness, because when no one sees you, it's easy to forget why you're here at all. This is the real alarm. Loneliness isn't just a feeling to sit with, it's a signal, a flare from the psyche that says, you are not meant to carry this life alone. But the danger is, the longer it lasts, the harder it becomes to reach. We begin to tell ourselves stories that no one would understand, that we've become too strange, too distant, that it's better not to burden anyone with our need. So we isolate further, not because we want to, but because we think we have to. And yet, the alarm keeps ringing, not as punishment, as invitation, to risk a conversation, to send the message, to be seen again. Because loneliness isn't just the absence of others, it's the absence of reflection. And when the mirror vanishes, even the clearest identity can start to blur into ghost. The biology of heartbreak. Why it hurts like a physical wound. You wake up and it hits you again. They're gone. The routine is shattered. The future you imagine dissolves into air. Your chest feels tight. Food has no taste. Time slows. This isn't just grief. It's withdrawal. Heartbreak is not poetic metaphor. It's physiological crisis. The brain reacts to social rejection the way it does to physical injury. Pain circuits light up. Cortisol floods the system. Sleep fractures. Focus collapses. You're not imagining it. Your body is in distress. Love bonds are chemically real. Oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, they form the glue of connection. And when that connection breaks, the crash is violent. The brain doesn't differentiate between losing a person and losing a limb. It sends out the same alarm: something vital is missing. So you ache, not figuratively, literally. The heart races. The stomach clenches. The limbs feel heavy. You replay moments in a loop, not to remember but to grasp, to reattach, to reclaim what was lost. But the more you reach, the more empty it feels. And that emptiness isn't just absence. It's the echo of what those chemicals used to stabilize. Their presence once regulated your stress. Their voice once calmed your nervous system. Now their silence destabilizes it. So you search, scroll, fantasize. Your mind tries to solve a puzzle it can't solve. How do I get back what I've lost if it no longer exists? And when the brain can't resolve the loss, it turns inward. What did I do wrong? What could I have changed? Was any of it real? Heartbreak is disintegration. It fractures identity. You don't just mourn the person, you mourn the version of yourself that existed with them. And in that grief, the body struggles to regulate. Because love wasn't just emotion, it was rhythm, pattern, home. But the pain has a purpose. It slows you down, forces reflection, carves space for truth to rise through the noise. And slowly, very slowly, the chemistry begins to shift. The nervous system starts to trust again. The world regains dimension, and breath by breath, you return, not to the life you had, but to the one waiting on the other side of release. Still, something lingers, a question, a craving, a need to feel close, even if only in the mind. The addictive nature of obsession. When wanting becomes the high, you think about them again and again. The image doesn't fade. The conversation replays. The silence screams. You tell yourself to stop, but your mind doesn't listen. This isn't just longing, it's obsession. And it operates like addiction. The brain craves patterns, closure, certainty, but obsession thrives on the lack of it, on the ambiguity, the maybe, the almost, the what if. And in the vacuum left behind by loss, the mind rushes to fill the space with loops. Obsession hijacks your attention. It narrows your vision. You can't read a page, watch a show, enter a room without scanning for some reminder, some signal, some chance that they might still be thinking of you too. But they're not the drug. The feeling is. The intensity. The fix. The way the brain lights up when you imagine getting what you want. Even if it never happens, the fantasy feeds you. And the more you feed it, the harder it is to stop. Obsession mimics hope, but it's rooted in fear. Fear of letting go. Fear of losing control. Fear that if you stop thinking about them, they'll disappear for good. And then what? What's left of your identity without the wanting? You build altars in your mind to conversations, to memories, to futures that never materialized. You overanalyze, decode, fantasize, not because it brings peace, but because it offers temporary escape. From what? From the emptiness beneath the craving, from the truth that closure might never come, from the ache of moving on when part of you still clings. And the body plays along. Every thought releases chemicals. Every flash of their name gives you a hit. And like any addiction, the cycle begins to feed itself. Even pain becomes familiar. Even pain begins to feel like proof. Proof that the connection mattered, that you haven't gone numb. You cling to the ache because it's something, anything, in the absence of their presence. So you chase the ghost. You check their profile. You imagine the message. You ache not for the person, but for relief. And yet, obsession promises something it can't deliver. It keeps you tethered to the past, while convincing you you're fighting for love. But love doesn't look like compulsion. It looks like presence, like calm, like truth. And truth only emerges when the fantasy fades, when you stop asking if they'll come back, and start asking why you still need them to. Because the ache might not be about them at all. It might be about the parts of you that still believe longing is the only kind of love you're allowed to feel. Empathy's limits. When feeling with others stops being enough. You listen to their story, you feel the weight in their voice, the ache behind their words. Your chest tightens. Your eyes blur. For a moment, you are inside their pain. This is empathy, the ability to step into another's world without leaving your own. To feel with, not just for, but empathy has limits. It's not infinite, not flawless. It's shaped by our histories, our biases, our bandwidth. We empathize more easily with those who look like us, sound like us, agree with us. Our compassion narrows when the story feels too foreign, too uncomfortable, too threatening to our worldview. And when we do feel deeply, when the pain hits too hard, too often, it can become overwhelming. Empathy fatigue is real. The body absorbs what the heart can't release. Chronic exposure to suffering can lead to numbness, burnout, even resentment. We turn away not because we've stopped caring, but because we don't know how to carry so much. Sometimes we shut down altogether. We build emotional distance as a form of self-preservation. We scroll past stories that once would have moved us. We skim headlines with dry eyes. And in those moments, it's not because we're callous. It's because our nervous systems are saturated. There's also the risk of distortion. Sometimes we think we're being empathetic when we're actually projecting. We imagine how we would feel and mistake that for understanding. We fill in the blanks with our own fears, assumptions, pain. We overwrite someone else's reality with our imagined version of it. So empathy, though vital, isn't always clear, or fair, or helpful. It requires presence but also boundaries. It asks us to witness without drowning, to relate without rewriting someone else's story through our lens. And it can't live alone. Empathy needs to be supported by discernment, by humility, by action. Otherwise it becomes a feeling that passes through us but leaves nothing changed. Sometimes we use empathy to justify forgiveness too soon, or to minimize harm. We think, I understand why they did it, and confuse that with healing. But understanding is not absolution. Real empathy is a quiet art, not about rescuing, not about agreement. It's about sitting with someone in their storm without needing to explain the weather away. It means asking questions we don't have answers to. It means being with pain instead of trying to fix it. It means honoring someone's experience even if it challenges our own. But it won't solve everything. Empathy can open the door. But healing, trust, repair, those take something more, something harder. Because even when we understand why someone hurt us, that doesn't mean we've truly forgiven them. Do we really forgive? The difference between letting go and forgetting. You say the words, "It's okay, I forgive you." Maybe you even mean it, but something lingers. A tension in the chest, a memory that won't go quiet. You're not holding a grudge, but you're not free either. So you wonder, did I really forgive them? Forgiveness is praised as healing, as strength, as the high road. We're told it frees us, that it's not for the other person, it's for ourselves. But sometimes, forgiveness feels like pressure. A timeline, a finish line you're supposed to cross before you're ready. Real forgiveness is messier than we admit. It's not a moment. It's a process, a slow unraveling of pain, expectation, identity. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it never finishes. And that doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're honest. Because to truly forgive, something in us has to shift. Not just intellectually, but emotionally. And that shift can't be forced. You can understand someone's reasons and still feel hurt. You can empathize and still feel betrayed. You can let go of the anger but still carry the scar. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering differently. It's revisiting the wound without letting it control you. It's reclaiming your story without letting theirs define it. It's learning how to live in a world where what happened still happened, but no longer owns you. And even then, the pain might revisit you. In a smell, a song, a familiar face. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you're human. Some people say, I forgive, but I'll never forget. But sometimes, we forget too soon. We say we've forgiven when really we've minimized, suppressed, denied ourselves the full truth of how deeply it cut. Real forgiveness makes room for the wound. It doesn't erase it, it honors the impact before releasing the grip. And sometimes, the hardest person to forgive is ourselves, for what we allowed, for what we missed, for how long we stayed, for not seeing it sooner, for being human. Forgiveness isn't a light switch, it's a tide. It recedes and returns. Some days it's stronger, other days you have to start again, and maybe that's the point. Not to get rid of the pain, but to stop letting it define who you are. Because even after the wound closes, the search for meaning begins. Not in what happened, but in how we carry it forward. The pursuit of meaning, why we can't stop asking what it's all for. You stare at the ceiling, or out the window, or into the blue glow of a screen. And somewhere beneath the noise, a question hums, what is all this for? The job, the relationships, the rituals, the striving, even the suffering. At some point, we all feel the need to make it mean something. We don't just want to live, we want to matter. Meaning isn't a luxury, it's a psychological necessity. Without it, life becomes flat, disconnected, a series of tasks without direction, a heartbeat without rhythm. And yet, meaning is fragile. It's not handed to us. It's pieced together from stories, from connections, from the way we interpret pain. And because it's built, not given, it can also fall apart. You lose someone, you fail. You watch something you believed in crumble, and suddenly the scaffolding of your purpose collapses. The pursuit begins again. Some find meaning in faith, others in family, in creativity, in service, in love. But it's never fixed. What anchors us at 20 may feel hollow at 40. What once felt profound may someday feel performative. So we search, we rebuild, we revise the story. And the truth is, we don't need grand answers. Sometimes meaning is found in small rituals. A shared laugh, a long walk, the way a stranger's kindness lingers, a fleeting moment of clarity in an otherwise ordinary day. Meaning is less about what you do and more about how you see. It's the lens through which life becomes tolerable, beautiful, bearable. But meaning isn't always comforting. Sometimes it asks more of us. Sometimes it demands we confront the very things we'd rather avoid. Grief, guilt, fear, uncertainty. And even when we think we've found our answer, life shifts. The ground moves, and suddenly the meaning that once held us no longer fits. So we begin again, not because we failed, but because we've changed. Still, we keep reaching. Because meaning makes pain survivable. It doesn't erase it, but it wraps it in purpose. It gives suffering a shape, a direction, a way to keep going. And underneath that search is the one truth we rarely say aloud. We know this ends. We know time is short, And somewhere in that awareness, the next question begins to form. Not just what is life for, but what does death demand of how we live? Mortality Salience. When the thought of death changes everything. You see an ambulance pass, a funeral procession, a headline, a diagnosis, and something in you tightens. A shadow crosses the mind. For a moment, you remember, you will die. This is mortality salience, the psychological experience of being reminded of your own death. It's not the abstract awareness that life ends someday. It's the immediate visceral recognition that your time is limited, that every breath has a number, that none of this is permanent. And when that awareness rises, something shifts. We think of death as paralyzing, but often it's clarifying. The trivial drops away. The posturing, the pettiness, the noise. What remains is what matters. Who matters? What we would regret not doing. Who we would regret not becoming. Mortality salience rearranges priorities. It makes us more grateful or more desperate, more generous or more afraid. It can awaken purpose or amplify anxiety. It depends on what we believe life means in the first place. Some respond by drawing closer to faith, family, legacy. Others seek distraction, adrenaline, control. Some feel renewed reverence. Others spiral into existential dread. There's no right way to react, but there is always a reaction. Because death awareness doesn't whisper, it interrupts. It pulls us out of autopilot. It reminds us that every ordinary day is an extraordinary chance, and yet most of us spend our lives trying not to think about it. We scroll, we plan, we fill every quiet space with noise. Not because we're shallow, but because we're scared. Scared that if we slow down, the full weight of mortality will catch up with us. But when we stop running, even for a moment, we begin to see clearly. The fear isn't just about death. It's about meaning, about whether we've lived fully, loved deeply, spoken the truth, left something behind that reflects who we really were. Mortality salience doesn't demand panic. It invites presence, to live not as if time is endless, but as if it's precious. Still, the question lingers. If the knowledge of death changes how we live, then what have we really built our lives on? What structures do we cling to when the end is always waiting just beyond the frame? Terror management theory. How we cope with knowing we'll die. You walk through life knowing it will end. Every day, you carry that awareness. Whether you feel it or not, it's built into you, into all of us. But we don't talk about it, not really. We build distractions, routines, identities, not just to live, but to manage the fear that shadows every breath. This is the heart of terror management theory, a psychological framework that suggests much of human behavior, our need for status, our loyalty to culture, our desire to be remembered, is shaped by our fear of death. Because to live with full awareness of our mortality would be overwhelming, so we construct meaning systems. We attach ourselves to worldviews, beliefs, and roles that promise something beyond the body, something permanent. We align with religions, nations, movements. We defend our values not just because we believe in them, but because they make us feel immortal by association. The theory argues that when people are reminded of their mortality, they cling more tightly to their beliefs. They become more defensive of their culture, more dismissive of outsiders, more reactive to anything that threatens their worldview. Because if your worldview crumbles, so does your shield against death. It's not always obvious. The reaction can be small. A harsh judgment, a defensive comment, a refusal to hear a different perspective. But underneath, something deeper is playing out, the need to feel safe in a world that guarantees your disappearance. And the paradox is this. The more we try to suppress death awareness, the more it shapes us in the shadows. We accumulate wealth, chase legacy, strive for greatness. Not just for joy, but for permanence, a way to outlast the body, to be more than bones. Even our need to belong takes on a new light. To be part of a group, a story, a lineage, these aren't just social cravings, they're existential ones. They remind us we're connected, that we won't vanish without a trace. But what if we let the fear surface, not to be consumed by it, but to understand it? What if much of what we do isn't just about living, but about not dying? And what if that fear isn't just psychological? What if it's biological too? What if deep down, the mind carries not just a fear of death, but a strange, silent pull toward it? Thanatos, the death drive, the strange pull toward our own undoing. You catch yourself sabotaging something good. You miss the deadline. You pick the fight. You let the moment slip. And afterward you wonder, why did I do that? This is the puzzle Sigmund Freud tried to solve when he proposed something unsettling, what he called Thanatos, the death drive. A force within the psyche that pulls not toward pleasure but toward dissolution. Freud saw that not all human behavior could be explained by desire for survival or gratification. There were moments, recurring, compulsive, when people repeated pain, chose chaos, stepped toward destruction, not away from it. The death drive is that pull, the slow, unconscious drift toward stillness, toward silence, toward the return to a state before sensation, before being. It's not a wish to die outright. It's subtler. It shows up in self-sabotage, in numbing, in the magnetic draw of oblivion when things get too bright, too loud, too much. It's in the person who disappears just before intimacy, the student who never opens the book, the addict who relapses the day after progress, the patterns that seem designed to unravel what we've built without understanding why. And the more we repress it, the more it surfaces through the cracks. Not because we want to suffer, but because suffering, strangely, sometimes feels safer than change, more familiar than joy. The death drive doesn't scream. It whispers. It tells us we're tired. That effort isn't worth it. That peace comes from giving up. It disguises itself as logic, as detachment, as rest. Some people find it in addiction, others in reckless risk, in cycles of toxic relationships, in the quiet urge to disappear, not as a cry for help, but as a slow resignation. The death drive is not rational. It doesn't calculate. It murmurs. It pulls. It invites a return to the void, not in violence, but in weariness, in the ache to be relieved of striving. And yet it's not entirely destructive. Because the drive toward dissolution also reminds us what's worth preserving. It brings the darkness to the surface, not to consume us, but to be seen, understood, held. It's a force to be danced with, not obeyed. We are wired with both Eros and Thanatos, the life force and the death drive, the builder and the breaker. One pushes us to create, connect, endure. The other tempts us to release, retreat, unravel. And in that tension, we live. To deny one is to misunderstand the other. Creation means nothing without the possibility of destruction. Joy means little without the shadow of sorrow. Maybe the goal isn't to silence the death drive, but to learn its language, to hear the moments when we long to disappear, and ask what part of us is tired of being here. The self as fiction, the story we tell to stay whole. You look in the mirror and call it you, a name, a face, a timeline, a favorite color, a list of memories. You say, this is who I am, but who is writing that story? The self feels solid, consistent, singular, but beneath that illusion is something far more fluid. The self is not a fixed entity. It's a narrative, a story your mind constructs to make sense of all the chaos inside. You weren't born with it. It was pieced together from family, culture, praise, punishment. You absorbed language, roles, expectations. You learned what to hide, what to emphasize, what to repeat, until it felt like truth. And the more the story was reinforced, the more people said, yes, that's you, the more real it began to feel. But it's still a story. It edits. It forgets. It adds meaning after the fact. It smooths contradictions, reshapes discomfort, writes continuity where none existed. Because the brain craves coherence. It doesn't want a collection of fragmented experiences. It wants a protagonist, a through line, a me, so it spins one. And most of the time, that fiction works. It gives us identity, stability, direction. It tells us what to pursue, what to fear, what to protect. It anchors us in time and space. But it also limits us. Because when the story gets too rigid, it becomes a cage, a script we can't deviate from, a set of rules we must obey in order to stay ourselves. You might say, I'm not the kind of person who does that. But what if you are? What if that's just an old line you've never questioned? And what happens when something breaks the story? A trauma, a transformation, a loss so deep it undoes who you thought you were. Suddenly, the narrative splinters, and the self begins to blur. That moment feels terrifying, but it can also be sacred. Because if the self is a story, then maybe you're allowed to rewrite it, not with lies, but with honesty, with freedom, with the recognition that you were never just one thing, never meant to fit a single shape. And once that possibility opens, once you glimpse how constructed your you has always been, you start to understand why the mind clings so tightly to its story, and how deeply it fears the alternative, a self with no center, only questions. The need for coherence, why we fear falling apart. You tell yourself a story to fall asleep. You repeat it in the morning to remember who you are. It doesn't matter if it's messy as long as it holds together. This is coherence, the deep psychological need for a self that makes sense. We don't just want to exist. We want our existence to feel unified, to believe that who we were yesterday matches who we are today, and that it points toward who we'll become tomorrow. When that line breaks, something inside us panics. Because coherence is more than comfort. It's a survival strategy. When your life makes sense, your emotions feel manageable, your past feels useful, your identity feels intact. You can move through the world with direction, even if that direction is uncertain. But when coherence falters after trauma, failure, contradiction, grief, the self begins to splinter, and suddenly you don't just lose your footing, you lose the feeling of being someone at all. We respond by reaching for narrative. We explain, justify, reframe. We say things like everything happens for a reason, or this made me who I am. Not because it's always true, but because it keeps the thread intact. We even revise memory to protect the story. We forget the parts that don't fit. We emphasize what makes sense. We reshape moments, not to deceive, but to survive. And when others contradict our narrative, we react, not just with disagreement, but with defensiveness, because challenging someone's story of self feels like threatening their foundation. It's why we resist change, why we cling to labels, why we avoid looking too closely at the parts of ourselves we don't understand. Coherence gives us peace, but it can also trap us. Because when the story becomes more important than the truth, we stop growing, we stop listening, we stop becoming. Still, the need for coherence doesn't disappear. We crave a thread, a meaning, a center. And when we can't find it in this life, we start to look beyond it. Beyond the body, beyond the timeline, beyond the final breath, towards something that doesn't break apart when we do. Our secret longing for immortality, the quiet hope that we won't just disappear. You blow out the candles. Another year gone. You scroll through old photos and feel something you can't name, a quiet ache that everything is always moving further away. Underneath the goals, the plans, the performances, there's a whisper. I don't want to be forgotten. This is the longing for immortality. Not the fantasy of living forever, exactly, but the deeper wish that something of us might last, that our story won't end with silence. We chase it in subtle ways, in art, in legacy, in the names we give our children, in the marks we try to leave on others. We build monuments, biographies, timelines, anything to outlive the body. But it's not just about the world remembering us. It's about staying intact in our own minds, about feeling real, continuous, permanent. Because death isn't just frightening, it's destabilizing. It doesn't just stop the body. It threatens the narrative. What was all of this for if it ends? And so we imagine futures where we still exist, where our presence lingers, where our image, our voice, our impact survive time, even if only in memory, even if only in data. Religion answers this by promising something beyond. Science answers with cryonics, simulation, DNA. But underneath both is the same hunger, to not be erased, to know that our being mattered enough to resist disappearance. And yet, this longing can quietly shape everything. It can turn relationships into performance, work into monument building, life into legacy management. Because when permanence becomes the goal, the present starts to feel like a rehearsal. You begin to curate your story rather than live it. You seek significance in everything, not for its own sake, but to ensure it endures. You speak less from truth and more from the desire to echo beyond your time. But maybe immortality doesn't come from being remembered. Maybe it comes from how deeply we are felt. From the moments that change someone else's interior world in a way they never fully explain. Maybe the real afterlife lives in the invisible imprints we leave behind, in gestures, in kindness, in courage passed down through stories no one will know started with us. Maybe it's not about fame or statues or pages in history. Maybe it's about resonance. About the part of you that lives on in the laugh you gave to a child, the comfort you offered a friend, the idea you shared that planted a seed in someone else's future. And yet, even that thought, even that comfort, points to something deeper. We don't just want to be remembered. We want to believe we were here for a reason, and that reason somehow might live on. The will to leave a mark, why we reach beyond ourselves. You write the book, plant the tree, start the company, raise the child, say the thing that's been waiting in your throat for years. You do it not just for yourself, but for something bigger, because deep down, we want to leave a mark. It's not always grand. Sometimes it's subtle, a moment where you changed someone's day, a gesture that outlived the moment, a kindness no one asked for but no one forgot. We long to be part of something that stretches past us, to matter not just now, but later, to be more than a passing name. More than a set of fading memories. This isn't ego, it's legacy. It's the ache to shape the world in some way before we exit it. You see it in art, in activism, in innovation, in the quiet labor of care. All of it an effort to leave behind something that says, I was here, and it meant something. Because in a universe where time erodes everything, impact feels like resistance. But the will to leave a mark can take many forms. Some build empires, others plant gardens. Some seek recognition, others work in silence. Some strive to change the world, others focus on changing just one life, and none of it is wasted. Even the smallest trace, a story passed down, a lesson remembered, a smile that lives in someone else's joy can ripple far beyond its moment. Still, this will can become distorted. When impact becomes obsession, when legacy turns into pressure, When the desire to be remembered overshadows the act of being alive, we start to measure our worth by our output. We begin to treat existence like a race against forgetting. But the mark that matters most isn't always visible. Sometimes it's not what we build, but how we were. The courage we modeled, the honesty we lived, the gentleness we gave when no one else did. We want to be etched into something, into stone, into stories, into someone's bones, because something in us believes that to be forgotten is to never have mattered. But maybe the deepest mark isn't carved into history. Maybe it's felt in the present, and maybe that ache to leave something behind is just the beginning of another drive. One that points not to permanence, but to something even more elusive, transcendence. The drive toward transcendence, reaching for what lies beyond the self. You're standing still, but something inside you moves upward. A pull you can't name. A longing not for more things, but for something higher. Something that rises above survival, above success, above self. This is transcendence, the drive to go beyond. Beyond your history, beyond your name, beyond the loop of wanting and getting and wanting again. It's what makes you pause at a sunset, fall silent in the presence of beauty, weep at a piece of music you can't explain. It's the part of you that doesn't just want to win, but to dissolve, to merge, to become part of something vast. Transcendence isn't about escape, it's about expansion. It's what we reach for when the boundaries of identity feel too tight, when our roles feel like costumes, when achievement stops satisfying. We look for something that lifts us out of the ordinary, that reconnects us to wonder, to meaning, to awe. Some find it in nature, others in art, in worship, in meditation, in acts of radical service, in moments where the self is no longer the center, but a vessel. And in those moments, something cracks open. You feel small, but not insignificant, brief, but not empty. A spark in something infinite. And strangely, that awareness doesn't diminish you, it steadies you. Because the drive to transcend isn't a rejection of self, it's a reaching toward wholeness. But this drive can also go awry. When we chase transcendence through power, through control, through ego, dressed as enlightenment. When the need to rise above others replaces the urge to dissolve into something shared. True transcendence is humble. It doesn't shout. It doesn't seek applause. It's quiet, sometimes invisible, but when it arrives, it shifts everything. You stop needing to be the main character. You start seeing yourself as a thread in a much larger fabric. And you wonder, if something this vast exists, where did it come from? Who or what designed the pattern we're woven into? And why do we keep creating stories that point towards something divine? Why we create gods, giving shape to the infinite. You sit in silence, staring at the stars. Something stirs. It's not a thought, it's a feeling. The sense that this vastness isn't just empty, that something watches, or listens, or simply is. Since the beginning, we've looked up and wondered, and when wonder grew too large for words, we gave it form. We shaped the mystery into faces, voices, stories, gods. Not just to control the world, but to understand it, to explain why we're here, to anchor the chaos, to create meaning where there was only noise. Gods gave structure to the ungraspable. They made death less final, pain less senseless. They turned nature into narrative, randomness into intention. We didn't just worship them, we needed them. Not only as creators, but as mirrors. Our gods carried our fears, our hopes, our longings. They punished what we feared in ourselves. They blessed what we dreamed of becoming. They were cosmic reflections, elevated versions of our most human traits. But creating gods wasn't just about fear or power. It was about intimacy, relationship, a desire to be known by something infinite, to matter in the eyes of the eternal. We made gods in our image because we needed them to feel familiar, to walk beside us in our confusion, to whisper comfort through parables and prayers, to wrap our chaos in order, our helplessness in meaning. And even now, in a secular age, we haven't stopped. We still build temples, only now they're digital, cultural, political. We deify celebrities, ideologies, algorithms. We invent higher powers out of systems and symbols because something in us still wants to believe there's an order above our own. We hunger for the sense that someone or something is keeping watch. That suffering has a witness. That love echoes beyond this moment. Because the alternative that it's all meaningless, random, silent, is too heavy to carry alone. So we keep shaping the divine, not because we know, but because we need to hold our grief, to witness our joy, to forgive what we can't fix, to love something too big to lose. Even those who claim no faith still speak the language of longing, still kneel in some form before the vastness of time, mystery, connection, still look for answers in beauty, in justice, in the ache to be understood. Whether gods exist beyond us or only inside us may be beside the point. Because sometimes the very act of reaching upward is what keeps us grounded. And believing in something greater, even if it's just for a moment, might be what lets us live with everything we can't understand. Thank you for staying with me through this long and winding journey into the hidden architecture of what drives us. If something in this video sparked a thought, challenged a belief, or made you feel a little more human, consider supporting this channel. Leave a comment and share what resonated most with you. Like the video if you felt it was worth your time, and if you want to explore more together, hit subscribe. There's so much more to uncover and you're always welcome here.